Reborn in the empire where the sun never sets to become a pirate. Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction, so please don't attempt real magic. The results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 201, Death. May 13th, Lee Robert Bay. Ship sighted in the third channel, a schooner-class ship. Order the Badger to attack, the Horseshoe to support. Yes. Order the Badger to attack, the Horseshoe to support. Both ships, replying, received. Listening to the flurry of combat orders, Lorraine raised his telescope and scanned the vast ocean for the Badger. It wasn't difficult. Although the Halloween warships were separated by a distance, their general location had never been hidden from Lorraine. He soon found his target. Through the telescope, the Badger, with sails fully deployed, cut a straight line across the sea, charging fiercely towards the lurking schooner-class ship more than 10 kilometers away. The outcome was sealed from that moment. Warship versus non-warship, soldier versus non-soldier, the Badger held an absolute advantage in both firepower and combat skills, and with Bell's commanding ship, the Horseshoe, providing support. No matter how you looked at it, that poor schooner-class ship had no chance of recovery. Lorraine lowered his telescope with a bored look, leaned against the mainmast, and glanced at Nelson, who stood solemnly in the lookout. "Admiral, this kind of battle doesn't require your attention. The Major and Bell will sink schooner soon. Even a lion fighting a rabbit would give it its all, Drake." Nelson touched the smooth hoop of the lookout. "Come to think of it, I haven't thanked you yet for lending me the Golden Hind. It's higher up, after all. Compared to the Badger, you can obviously see farther from the Golden Hind. That's a great help." This conversation took place atop the Golden Hind's mainmast. Nelson and his signalman occupied the mainmast's tallest lookout on the ship. Out of courtesy and boredom, Lorraine chose to accompany them, sitting bored on the extended spars from the lookout, high above. Lorraine did some mental calculations. "Admiral, should we bombard the coast appropriately? Appropriate bombardment? Intimidation, almost." Lorraine stretched lazily. "Since yesterday afternoon, when we started indiscriminate hunting on the inner side of the bay, all the ships in the bay have hidden in the dock. The scouts reported 13 ships. Since then, except for the limited number of ships entering the bay, we have nothing to do." Nelson covered his chin depressedly. "I thought they would rely on the number of ships to organize at least one counterattack. Now it seems that I seem to have overestimated the bloodiness of the French. Merchants generally think rationally. Facing the Golden Deer, I don't think the impulsive faction can dominate the dock. We have to help them make up their minds to save themselves. Bombard, take down those 2 old artillery batteries and let them know that the dock can't protect them. I need to think about it again." On May 13th, the day after the Halloween fleet entered Lee Robert Bay, Bell and the replenished Lucky Horseshoe officially returned to the team and participated in the fleet's hunting operation for the first time. Lee Robert Bay is a sheltered bay outside the Martinique coastal town of Lee Robert. It borders the Garriam Bay off the coast of La Trinité to the north and Lee François, home to the French frigate, to the south. It's Martinique's second-best harbor after the Bay of Fort Franca, yet it hasn't received the attention and development it deserves. Lee Robert isn't prosperous. Compared to the Atlantic coast's core commercial port of Sainte Marie and the military stronghold of Lee François, the town appears unremarkable from any angle, despite its strategic location central to both, offering ample opportunity to merge their functions from the outset. The primary culprit for this situation is the island chain at the bay's entrance. This curved chain, like a threshold, stretches across the bay's entrance, its edges densely dotted with a jumble of visible and submerged reefs and islands. This makes the channel in and out of the bay winding and narrow, making it unacceptable for battleships of rank II or higher. Even small boats must navigate with extreme caution, treading on thin ice. But it was precisely this geographical and hydrological environment that led Nelson to choose this spot as the venue for the decisive battle with the French frigate. The island belt has 5 entrances and exits. The narrowest, channels 2 and 3, are only suitable for single-masted and small, non-standard-sized schooners. The wider channels 1 and 5 are suitable for Tier V and VI ships under 45 meters. Channel 4 offers the best conditions, barely accommodating Tier IV frigates around 50 meters in length and with a draft greater than 6 meters. After the loss of the Lucky Horseshoe, the frigate's remaining combat power still consists of the Tier IV Andes, the Tier V Jupiter, and 3 Tier VI ships, surpassing the Halloween fleet in both soft and hard power. Only by remaining within the sieve-like bay could the Halloween fleet maximize its ability to divide its opponents, minimize the perceived gap in combat power, and provide the commander with ample tactical flexibility. But Martinique was, after all, a French turf, and the situation in Lee Robert Bay could not be concealed from the defending fleet. How to convince the enemy to surrender while fully aware of the situation became Nelson's impending challenge. His answer was provocation. The aborted plan to destroy Lee Rollin was the first provocation. Nelson had intended to begin with Lee Rollin, exposing his movements and destroying the docks along the coast. This would convey the disparity in strength between the two sides, mock the defending fleet's incompetence and cowardice, and force them into decisive battle with the Halloween fleet on Nelson's chosen battlefield. However, that plan did not go smoothly. The destruction of Lee Rollin's guns aborted Nelson's original plan. Operation Heart's Arsonist became a substitute for destroying Lee Rollin, and the Lucky Horseshoe and Zern became new tools to provoke the defending fleet. This tool was the human wind chime at Hell's Gate. The wind chime's insult was self-evident, but compared to the suffering ports, its weight paled. To ensure the continuation of his grand strategy, Nelson resorted to a desperate measure, switching from bombarding Lee Robert to a blockade. Geographically, this effectively slapped the defense fleet commander with the label incompetent. The enemy had to respond to Nelson's ultimate provocation. The British had already put their ships in the French's hands. If the Halloween fleet escaped unscathed, the defense fleet commanders, responsible for maintaining order along the Atlantic coast, would be forced to retreat. Nelson felt he had laid a heavy bait. Whether or not to bombard Lee Robert would have no impact on the decisive battle, so why did Lorraine continue to advocate a land bombardment? Attacking land, even against just 2 decrepit forts, would carry enormous risks for the fleet. Was it the pirates' predatory nature that was at work? Nelson shook his head. Lorraine only suggested bombardment and did not force a landing, which means that his fundamental goal was not Lee Robert's wealth. The refugee ships and the dock ships. Nelson suddenly woke up. These days, he has been too focused on the powerful defense fleet, so much so that he ignored the hidden threat that is so close. The refugee ships and the dock are very weak, like children who have not grown up. They are only qualified to tremble in front of the adults of the Halloween fleet. But no matter how weak the ship is, they still have cannons on their decks, and no matter how small the children are, they still have blades in their hands. What if, at the moment of the decisive battle between the two fleets, these merchant ships participate at all costs, the Halloween fleet, which is not at an advantage, will be caught in a desperate situation of being attacked from both sides. This is fatal. Nelson was frightened and broke out in a cold sweat. Drake, the defense fleet will arrive at the battlefield at any time. I can't turn all my guns on Lee Robert, we only have the Golden Deer and the Lucky Horseshoe, and only half a day. Are you sure you can send all the small boats on the dock to the bottom of the sea before dawn tomorrow? Of course not. Lorraine scratched his head and said embarrassedly, but we have to do this kind of self-rescue thing no matter what, don't we? Chapter 202 Where the Knife Points. The telescope's view was pitch black. Towns, buildings, docks, ships, everything was lost in the midnight blackness, making it impossible to discern the boundary between sea and sky. A sky covered with dark clouds, a town under siege. Tisk, I didn't realize they matched so well before, Lorraine muttered, lowering the telescope and waving for Acheron, who was arranging the deck guns. Is the firepower deployed? Reinforce the starboard upper gun support, totaling 10 18-pounders and 12 12-pounders. The ship's counterweight is a bit insufficient, though. Considering the center of gravity, I suggest removing the bow and stern guns, or reducing the upper guns to 8. Just remove the stern guns, Lorraine thought for a moment. The unused shotgun and chain shells can also be moved to the bottom hold to maintain the center of gravity. That would compromise the ship's maneuverability, Acheron said worriedly. Make sure that the mobile combat capability can be restored within an hour. Also, the firepower configuration of the Lucky Horseshoe will not be changed, and let it serve as the final line of defense for the Golden Deer. Understood, Acheron shouted and ran to pass the order, and came back after a while. Captain, No matter how tight the time is, it is too much for the Admiral to ask for everything from formulating a battle plan to achieving the combat objectives overnight. Lorraine tilted his head with an expressionless face. How long do you want? The family glory is on watch outside the bay, and there has been no signal sent back so far. This means that the defense fleet has not responded to the challenge yet, right? In this case, wouldn't it be better to prepare for another day? This delay is meaningless. Lorraine closed his eyes. Larrabel won't run away. The situation at the dock will not change much today or tomorrow. This means that we have only so many combat methods to choose from, and it will be the same if we delay until tomorrow, but the visibility tonight, we can start with extended firing. Once the town is on fire, visibility will be guaranteed. Lorraine stretched out his hand to feel the sea breeze. Acheron, the weather's getting colder. It'll probably rain tomorrow, so we need to bombard early. I know rain will slow the spread of the fire, Acheron sighed. But as a Frenchman, this plan isn't exactly a pleasant one. Henna, clad in a pure black smock, leaped from the wall like a night spirit, landing silently. Following closely behind her, Noah, Pierce, and the carefully selected Golden Hind stormtroopers emerged from the darkness. Henna raised her hand in a hushed gesture. Noah, what's the time? 1:06 a.m. We should have enough time. Henna took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began comparing the images she had observed at dusk. The wall they had just climbed should belong to a private warehouse near the bay. The roof, walls, and other details matched perfectly as far as the eye could see. 50 meters south of this warehouse was Battery 1, marked by Lorraine, and another 320 meters further south was Battery 2, located further into the bay. These two forts were relics of Martinique's early development, designed to defend against unbridled pirates. They were therefore designed to withstand wide-angle fire from naval guns. Their spherical, semi-enclosed hull, 270 degrees wide, was constructed entirely of bluestone and lined with cork, reminiscent of the domes of later observatories. Their design offered exceptional sea defense. The Golden Hind's firepower was incapable of penetrating such composite barriers. To successfully bombard the docks, the only option was to infiltrate Lee Robert, a precarious town, and dismantle the forts from land. So, starting at nightfall, Henna and her selected men disembarked in a small boat 40 kilometers south of the town. After a 5-hour journey along the coast, they circumvented 3 heavily guarded militia lines before successfully reaching the forts. Location confirmed, Henna opened her eyes. Noah, according to Lorraine's plan, I'll take 10 men to Battery 2, and you and Pierce will lead the remaining 30 to destroy Battery 1. Noah stroked her docile white ears and nodded seriously. Sister Henna, aren't you too few? I heard those guns are very old, each weighing over 3 tons. I'm not good at coordinating with sailors, and too many men would be a waste. Henna shook her head. There's a temporary militia barracks between the 2 batteries, estimated to have over 200 people stationed there. So try not to use muskets until the destruction is complete. If there's any noise, it'll be very difficult to deal with. I know, then let's do it. Give me 15 minutes to exercise, and the attack will begin in 15 minutes, okay? And just like that, the pre-battle meeting, which didn't feel like a pre-battle meeting at all, ended so neatly. Henna led her 10 elite team members and swooped down towards Battery 2 in the darkness. Lorraine's words before they set off were playing in her mind. Henna, actually, neither you nor Noah are suitable for commanding the stormtroopers. Pierce might be able to in 5 years, but at this stage he's just an excellent shooter, but there's no other way. I have to stay on the ship this time to deal with any accidents. Bell has to command the Lucky Horseshoe to protect the Golden Deer. Acheron has to control the entire artillery line. I left Wang Yi and Kren in New Orleans. You two are the only ones on the ship with both combat power and prestige. In short, be careful. Don't force yourself. Give up when you should. Your actions are not that important. Remember, these are just 2 artillery batteries that should be sent to a museum. Even if I fail, I am confident that I can blow up the entire dock. 100% sure. Don't worry, don't worry. Don't worry. Henna stopped abruptly. The team members chasing behind her couldn't break in time. They rolled over with their hands covering their mouths. Although they looked a little embarrassed, they didn't make any strange sounds. Hide yourselves, she said to the pile of gourds. If anyone accidentally reveals their whereabouts before I kill everyone in the battery, commit suicide. It's the quickest way to die. The gourds bared their teeth and nodded repeatedly. They sensed Henna's murderous gaze and hurriedly scrambled to their feet, finding cover to lie down. Once everyone was out of sight, Hannah leaned over to remove her loose overalls and then her tight boots, carefully folding them in a dark corner. Then, dropping to all fours, she leaped like a cat onto the sleek, towering face of the battery. The stormtroopers hiding in the shadows watched in amazement at this inhuman scene. Slender Hannah leaped onto the dome, limbs spread wide, her upper body leaning forward. Her elbows and knees were bent at sharp angles, her neck tilted high, her gaze fixed squarely on the road ahead. But her body clearly didn't touch the curved stone wall. Her chest, abdomen, thighs, and chin all maintained a delicate angle with the curve. With only her bent fingertips and toes, she stuck to the nearly vertical surface, motionless. In just a moment, sweat began to bead on her forehead. She panted, her breaths growing longer and longer. I'm clearly not good at lying to my companions. How clumsy. Anyway, I won't let you down. Me, Noah, Pierce. Wherever your knife points, even Jehovah's head will be plucked from your hands. Don't worry, Lorraine. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 203, All Silence. In peacetime, the semi-enclosed spherical gun turrets, resembling the domes of later observatories, were the most famous historical landmark on Lee Robert Wharf. They bore witness to the glorious pioneering history of Lee Robert and the entire Martinique, characterized by confidence, self-respect, freedom, indestructibility, and invincibility. The 8-meter-high, double-tier turrets rested on a 4-meter-high stone platform. From the outer walls to the cantilever deck, they were carved from locally sourced, dense bluestone. The supporting frame was constructed from solid oak timber, dried and treated for corrosion, ensuring they could withstand direct fire from heavy artillery, even if the stone walls crumbled. The exterior was almost completely enclosed, with only the rear fifth left open, facing the harbor, for smoke exhaust and personnel escape. Within, 6 state-of-the-art muzzle-loading heavy guns, 2 on top and 4 below, were installed 2 centuries ago. The 3-ton bronze guns, over 4 meters long, were equipped with specialized slide rails capable of covering a 30-degree angle in front of them, with a maximum range of 1.5 kilometers. The massive gun barrels easily accommodated the passage of slender young men, and if cleaned by child laborers, even the most hidden corners remained free of grime. Thanks to this easy-to-maintain design, the forts had remained at peak firepower for over 200 years. They were the protectors of the Lee Robert people. As long as they remained intact, even under the dire circumstances of the British siege, the Lee Robert people had the courage and resolve to endure the ravages of war. They believed that British warships could not reach Lee Robert. If they held out for a while, the powerful defense fleet would surge into the bay, consigning these Union Jack pirates and their wrecked ships to hell. Long live the defense fleet, long live Lee Robert. The Lee Robert people, confident of victory, carried their guns and cheered softly through the dark streets. No one could have imagined that a woman, like a spider, was scrambling atop their proud fortresses. He released his left hand, raised his elbow to half his arm's length, and dropped it. Then, right foot, right hand, left foot, back to left hand, repeating the cycle. Hannah employed a technique known primarily for male assassins, the art of insect fighting, one of the most extreme. While the technique itself lacks a formal name, the technique draws inspiration from the barbs on the feet of myriapods. Bandages are used to secure fine, uniformly oriented bevels to the tips of the fingers and toes. Slowly applying pressure creates limited leverage, supporting the body and enabling silent climbing in impossible conditions. Because the use of bevels relies on quantity, the technique requires minimal material requirements for the blade itself. Knife tips, needles, and even rock edges and wooden thorns in extreme environments can suffice. However, because climbing relies solely on the strength of the fingers, most women, due to their limited innate abilities, are unable to achieve the desired results. Hannah, thanks to her father and brother, undertook systematic training, but still could not meet the minimal assassin standard of scaling a 20-meter vertical fortress. Her physical limit was a 10-meter vertical climb, but beyond the initial 4-meter base, the angle of the turret's walls increased proportionally, allowing her a rare summit. She climbed silently, neither fast nor slow, her light and steady movements minimizing noise. Even with only a stone wall between them, the men in the turret remained oblivious to the looming threat. Thus, Hina reached the highest point of the sphere. Her limbs were nearly exhausted, but she had finally overcome her greatest challenge. She breathed softly, bent down, loosened the bandages around her fingers and toes, and, sliding back to bare skin, carefully returned the bandages to her pocket. She then retrieved a sling from her pocket. The sling was crucial. The turret's pinnacle had to be marked with a flagpole. Hina wrapped the sling around the pole and descended, hanging herself head first, like a spider hunting, to the second-floor loft. There were no stars or moon, no lights or fires. The semi-enclosed fort was enveloped in a sudden, gathering darkness, depriving Hina of her vision and burying her in the shadows, like a hanging ghost. She closed her eyes. Her ears were filled with a cacophony of sounds, breathing, mumbling in sleep, snoring, grinding teeth, the chilling wind that echoed through the dark room, and the interspersed sounds of very few footsteps and a myriad of strange frictions. There were 16 people on the second floor, 3 awake, 13 sound asleep. 5 of those sleeping were not deep, and only 1 awake was moving. The first floor had 42 discernible breathing sounds, 4 awake, 2 moving. This number roughly matched the 42 guns. Hina didn't rush to make a decision, but listened for a moment. The second floor had become 18, and some of their breathing overlapped, but the awake ones hadn't changed. Hina had already pinpointed their positions, and judging by the echoing wind, she knew there was nothing between her and the awake ones. This was simply the best possible scenario she could imagine. Hina suppressed her surprise, reached out and tightened her grip on the rope, then rolled sideways. Her soft bare feet lightly touched the ground, but didn't plant their feet firmly, steadying themselves on tiptoe. She kept her eyes closed, listening. With a flick of her right hand, 4 red velvet throwing knives were caught in her fingertips. She checked one last time. From the front, 11 o'clock, 9 meters away. The man's breathing was muffled, probably facing the bay, his back to her. From the front, 2 o'clock, 7 meters away. The man had been muttering about the fort's food and drink, his logic clear and lasting. From the side, 9 o'clock, 4 meters away. He was moving towards 10 o'clock, his steps light, as if he didn't want to wake anyone. From far to near. Hina's eyes snapped open, and the moment they did, she swung her arm, releasing 4 throwing knives one after another. The first, following the lookout's breathing, pierced the back of his head and exited his nose. The second blade, sensing a grumbling sound, slashed diagonally, piercing the walker's throat 3 feet below his mouth. The third and fourth blasts flew out almost simultaneously, the third piercing the walker's nose. The walker covered his face, uttering a cry of pain before a short whistle emanated. The fourth blade, following the sound, had already arrived, traversing his mouth and piercing the back of his head, severing his brainstem in 2. The walker fell to the ground, his meager movements drowned out by the clamor of the room. No one noticed the assassination that had taken place in the darkness. 3 night watchmen were slain in a moment, leaving only the lambs scattered across the entire platform, unaware of the impending disaster. Hina slowly unsheathed her dagger, loosening the rope and landing barefoot. Following the sound of her breathing, she took off, soundlessly drifting to her first target. She reached out, her left hand precisely grasping the man's mouth and nose in the darkness, dislodging his jawbone. With her right hand, she stabbed the blade deep into the side of his neck. A twist of the blade severed the blood vessels, larynx, vocal cords, and trachea. The victim wailed and trembled, his strength rapidly fading. Blood spurted from the episiotomy wound onto the wall. The struggle ceased in a moment. First, then second, third. The sound of lifeless breathing dwindled. By the time Hina stood up for the 13th time, the entire second floor had become a dead zone. Time to go down 1 level. Her lips formed into words, but her voice blended into the darkness, not a single sound emanating. The night was completely silent. Chapter 204 Witch. With a white ear resting on her shoulder and a crystal ball in her hand, Noah wore a tattered smock she'd found somewhere, covering her hair and highlighting her curly, smooth black hair and large, watery eyes. She wandered alone behind the fort, lantern slung over her shoulder, taking 1 step at a time, neither fast nor slow. Such a petite and fragile figure, illuminated by the only light on the entire pier, naturally caught the attention of the several fort's duty officers. "Hey, that person up front. Still wandering around the pier so late at night? Haven't you heard about the fire ban and curfew issued by the management committee?" Noah suddenly stopped, her back to the duty officer, and spoke timidly, her voice tearing. "What curfew, sir? I know nothing. No one told me anything. It's late, I just want to find a place to rest." At this time, the officers on duty suddenly became alert. Two of them raised their guns, and a third shouted from a few meters away, "Hey, turn around, or we'll shoot." Noa's shoulders seemed to tremble. She turned hesitantly, and the light covering the crystal ball fluttered to the ground as she turned. The light from the lantern slanted through the crystal ball, the light shifting from orange to deep purple, casting a hazy, uneven hue on Noa. She trembled in front of the crowd like a frightened kitten. "Sir, please don't shoot. I'm just a homeless wanderer. I mean no harm and I have no weapons." "Stand still," the officer shouted, his voice echoing across the dock, causing a slight commotion. A figure gathered from the darkness, taking in the scene and letting out a mocking laugh. "Look what the guys at the battery found, a beautiful stray cat. Damn, they're so lucky, don't overdo it, guys." The shadows gradually dissipated, and a faint voice blended with the sound of the waves. "The gentlemen in the council and the management committee are no angels. If something goes wrong, it's more trouble than it's worth." Noa trembled even more violently. She held the crystal ball, her body trembling slightly, causing the light bands on her body to twist in a strange rhythm. The night watchmen felt their vision go out of control, subconsciously following the swaying bright lines. But strangely, this feeling wasn't bad, even strangely comforting, like a beautiful dream. "Don't move. Don't move." "You," meow, white ear, who had been motionless, suddenly opened his eyes, his amber cat pupils widening, and strands of black lines mixed with a yellow background expanded and expanded, invading the world and swallowing up people's hearts. Their outstretched hands froze in place, only a meter or two away from Noa. Noa stopped trembling, put down the crystal ball, and her face flushed slightly. She took the initiative to walk forward, ignoring the two long guns pointed at her head, and stood in front of the night watchman who spoke with a stern expression. "I am Noa of the Sarah tribe, a master more precious than your life. You are the master. We have a bond that transcends life. From the beginning of God's creation, we have been connected as one, connected as one. This bond is the deepest secret in heaven and earth. You believe in it deeply, and you will never tell anyone. Believe, without a doubt. You will obey me absolutely, wholeheartedly, and without regret. Absolutely, obey." Noa took a deep breath, her face flushed blood. "Now, tell me, who am I?" "You are," the night watchman's voices struggled, and their eyes gradually dulled. "You are the master. Tell me, what are you doing, guarding the fort? By whose orders?" "An order issued by the regional council, and the militia recruited by the dock management committee." "For what?" "To guard against the British. Those damn pigs surrounded Lee Robert, and no one knows why." "How many people are in the fort?" 62 in total, 39 on the lower level and 23 on the upper level." "How many people are on duty?" 4 on the lower level and 2 on the upper level. "Can you call them out without alerting others?" "You can, but you have to use words that blaspheme the master." "Go, bring them to the alley. I allow your blasphemy." Not long after, 7 or 8 sneaky figures shoved in the alley near the fort. "Barrack, where's the little beauty you're talking about? Is she really not the daughter of some great man? How could a lowly flamenco be related to some great man? Besides, what family would be wandering around outside at this hour?" "Barrack," the night watchman who was making the calls, replied with a lewd grin. "That's truly a blessing from God. At a time like this, puff, puff, puff. A hail of arrows pelted from the end of the dark alley. Bows, crossbows, and harpoons flew everywhere. The ships always had a small supply of silent shooting equipment for the sailors' hunting pleasure, but now they all became deadly weapons, a single volley of shots knocking the incoming figures to the ground. Barrack twitched and fell to the ground, his eyes vacantly fixed on the overcast sky. "Master, be careful, there's an ambush." "Master," puff. The sharp command sword pierced the back of Barclay's neck, severing Barclay's last remaining hope. Tiny Pierce stood among the corpses, his gaze sweeping down the dark back alley. "Finish off the vital points, don't miss any survivors. The rest of you, silence, and enter the battery." Battery number 2. The sailors, hiding in the shadows, caught sight of the flickering wind lantern. Beneath it, a pretty, brown face, emerald eyes sparkling. The lantern flickered, and the sailors, scrambling from every corner, entered the battery. A strong smell of blood filled their nostrils. "Ms. Yesra, gather gunpowder, pack it into bags, and stuff them inside and outside the cannons. Hina, following her memory, collected her throwing knives, wiping them clean and sheathing them. Leave enough fuses for escape, and arrange for someone to stay behind to fire the guns. Even though there are no survivors in the battery, be wary of the patrols. They take the battery very seriously. The sailors exchanged bewilderment. The scene before them was horrific. The small space was filled with corpses scattered about, the curved stone walls splattered with blood. Each corpse bore the same expression, open mouths in horror. A massive wound pierced the side of the neck, not through, but bare, flesh protruding from the outside. Before their eyes, Hannah single-handedly slaughtered the entire battery in less than half an hour, without a trace of blood. So close, they didn't even hear a sound. How could such a silent slaughter be carried out? Who could slaughter 50 or 60 men and remain so impassive? Could there truly be a god of death walking the earth? Men at sea worship the strong. And Hannah's display of strength far surpassed their conception of strength. They almost bowed down in worship, frozen in place. Hannah frowned helplessly. What are you standing there for? Use the bodies as cushions. There's blood on the ground. Be careful not to get the gunpowder damp. Yes, Mom, the sailors replied, their voices suppressed, as if waking from a dream. About half an hour later, nearing 3 o'clock, a tremendous roar echoed from battery number 1, echoing throughout Lee Robert. Bright flames shot straight into the sky, and a swirling gust of wind blew off the roof. Something shattered, resembling a cannon, tumbled through the air, flying over 10 meters, collapsing nearby low-rise buildings. Lee Robert was awakened, and the panicked people screamed as they ran out of their rooms, just in time to see the number 2 battery soar into the sky with a new roar. Attention all ships. Load solid ammunition, target Lee Robert dock, suppress the attack, and open fire, open fire. Chapter 205 Hell. Heat waves, surging flames, screams and wails, the roar of cannons intertwined with the clatter of collapsing buildings, accompanied by the swallowing of water by ships and docks, the crackling of burning wood and grease, and the whimpering of the wind. Lee Robert plummeted into the 6th circle of hell, his sight filled with a burning apocalypse. A brilliant crimson flame connected to the sky, igniting the dense, cotton-like clouds. And yet, Lorraine, the instigator of all this, recited poetry from the side of the ship. Through me enter the city of endless suffering, through me enter the pit of eternal misery, through me enter the throng of those who are beyond redemption. Justice moves my sublime creator, I am the work of divine power, divine consciousness, and divine love. Before me, there was no eternal creation, I will endure as long as heaven and earth. Those who enter must abandon all hope. Atron paused in his hurried steps and glared at Lorraine. A pagan actually calls himself the love of God so openly? Captain, you really don't take divine punishment seriously. Lorraine chuckled lightly. The inscription on the gate of hell praises Satan, which is originally blasphemous language for believers in God. The God in the poem is not your God, and the creator in the poem is not the same as your Lord. In short, even if divine punishment really happens, the one who presides over the divine punishment is definitely not the only true God. The profession is not right. Yatron sweated on his forehead after hearing this. If it is really Satan, normal people should be more worried. Worried? Why? Lorraine pretended to be confused and let go. In this world, God has monopolized too many believers, which means that except for him, the remaining gods are all minorities and poor creatures controlled by the devil. As both are gods who have fallen into the world, I think the relationship between Nilde and Mr. Satan can be good. Occasionally borrowing names to chant things, Mr. Satan doesn't need to make a big deal out of it. Moreover, even if we only consider it from a business perspective, small churches like theirs can only effectively expand their social influence through small means such as caring for each other's believers. Let the pagans always feel the favor of God and receive post-belief services that are far superior to those of God's believers. That is the most effective way for small churches to survive in the cruel competition. So, why should I worry? Lorraine's question hit Atron's blind spot. Atron stood there like a candle for a long time, and suddenly turned around and slapped the back of the head of the nearest gunner. No rush, no slowness. Ground attack is different from anti-ship combat. The attack state is basically fixed, and the target is so huge that there is no possibility of losing it. Anti-ship combat requires rapid fire. The entire ship must try its best to gain a few minutes or even a minute of shooting time. The gunners must throw as much ammunition as possible during this period to inflict heavy damage on the agile opponent. Ground combat requires stability. Shooting once every 2 minutes is the most suitable frequency for suppressing fire. The high temperature and energy efficiency of the projectile can be completely released. You don't need to deliberately adjust the muzzle. The ups and downs of the waves will naturally spread the impact point. Taking into account the breadth and density of the bombing, now, 1 group of live ammunition, 2 groups of chain bullets. Please treat this battle as a shooting practice, cooperate with a team, and complete each action accurately. Back off. Clear the chamber. Load the powder. Press the chamber. Load. Get in. Lock the wheels. Fire. Under Yatran's hysterical command, another round of artillery fire exploded, thick smoke rose into the sky from left to right, and the deafening roar rumbled incessantly. Red-hot projectiles soared high, leaping the 700 or 800 meters, from the dock to the residential buildings, carving an upward arc between 2 collapsed gun emplacements. 1 solid bullet struck the sloop fishing boat at berth number 2, penetrating the deck and breaching the hull, blasting a massive hole. Seawater poured into the hold, and the slender fishing boat sank at a visible rate. At least 3 more shells struck the moored ships, the most effective chain shells whirling and severing the mainmast of a schooner. More shells pounded the plank road, breaking the 4th plank road pillar. The floating island lost its center of gravity, tilting and twisting into a giant pretzel. Starting with the 12th shell, the impact points began to touch land. Even though the ship's guns couldn't use the most advanced grenades, the sunny weather and the hot projectiles set the wooden huts ablaze. Fueled by the wind, the flames roared deep into the town. Lorraine silently watched the smoke and flames beneath the firelight, a stark contrast to the way he'd previously spoken so brazenly before Acheron. He saw 3 ships forcibly hoisting anchor, 2 schooner-class ships and a slave ship no smaller than the Golden Deer, racing against time to set sail. Lorraine sneered. "Lucky Horseshoe, halt your fire and engage the dock. Send a message to Captain Judea, saying that slave ship is a good one, and asking him to seize it for the Chamber of Commerce." Yes, the order was quickly relayed to Bell through the changing flags. Of the 3 fleeing ships, the schooner-class ship at berth 6 had already begun to turn. Bell raised his telescope, took a quick glance, and gave a clear order. Order. All ships, cease fire immediately. Deck in position, prepare for boarding. Full rudder to port, full sail, 20-degree rigging, ready to cut the wind. Lucky Horseshoe, meet the enemy. The Lucky Horseshoe was in motion, guns retracted, sails unfurled. She cut through the water against the strong night wind, maneuvered across the vast bay, and slipped through the bombardment area during the intervals between the Golden Hind's shelling. She was clearly a newly built ship, assembled with improvised crews, but naval navigation was a discipline that applied collective behavior, and the barrel theory didn't apply to ships. Or rather, with a commander's skillful command, the ship's barrel could be tilted within a certain range, avoiding its weak points and allowing it to hold more liquid. Bell, with his professional skills, revitalized the Lucky Horseshoe. She might still stumble, her trajectory still showing subtle fluctuations, but she had indeed reached the threshold of a powerful warship, exuding a terrifying aura like a behemoth to the fishing boats and slave ships on the other side. Superior in firepower, defense, navigation, and positioning, the Lucky Horseshoe, charging out, pinned its enemies to the narrow waters just outside the harbor. With close-range fire, it sank a schooner leaving the harbor. Then, seizing the T-bone position, 4 rounds of artillery fire shattered the main and secondary masts of another schooner. In just 30 minutes, Bell had triumphantly escaped a 1-on-3 disadvantage, bracing himself against the sea breeze as he pursued the frightened behemoth. Victory was only a matter of time. Slave ships were common special-purpose vessels of the era. While not restricted to a specific type, most underwent specialized modifications to suit their specific uses. For example, the slave ship before us was based on the same Beige type as the Jackdaw, ranked 5th, with twin longitudinal and forward beams. The Beige type was not originally a warship design, lacking the sturdiness and robustness of the galleon type in terms of hull materials and structure. Furthermore, the modifications to the slave ship further weakened its firepower. 6 12-pounders were mounted forward and aft, with 8 9-pounders remaining on the main deck. The gun compartment, once the most powerful, was completely enclosed, significantly increasing the space for men and supplies, but also removing a crucial asset. With its current capabilities, it could pose no threat to the Lucky Horseshoe in mobile warfare. However, in Lorraine's hands, a simple modification would transform it into the Caribbean chapter's most advanced armed merchant ship. Lorraine and Bell were both well aware of this, So Bale preferred caution over inflicting significant damage to the slave ship's hull. While protecting the disabled Golden Hind and repelling the slave ship, an hour passed in a flash. The sky was a pale, white in the east, red in the west, and between the gold and red lay a thick cloud. The wind swept across the fields, piercing the air with a chill. A heavy rain is coming. Lorraine, scanning the sea through his binoculars, saw the near ruin of Lee Robert, the graveyard of sunken ships at the dock, the desperate humans wandering in the sea of flames, and the 2 assault boats drifting far away, quietly bobbing in the safe waters. Hannah, Noah, Pierce, and the still chubby white ears. Everyone was safe. For the first time since the entire night, Lorraine smiled heartily. Contact the assault boats to return and pick up the warriors who have toiled all night. Lorraine casually tossed the binoculars aside. Acheron, we've essentially achieved our ground objectives. Now let's transition to precision strikes and wrap things up. Yes, sir. Acheron breathed a sigh of relief and was about to say something to liven things up when suddenly, alarm bells blared. Emergency contact from the Lucky Horseshoe. The French Channel Fleet has appeared. The French Channel Fleet has appeared. The Badger and Wasp are out to meet them. Please prepare for battle. Lorraine froze for a moment. Perfect timing, he muttered. It seems we've underestimated our opponent, my Nelson. Admiral, P.S. The poem is from Dante's Divine Comedy, and it's the inscription on the gates of hell. Similarly, the 7th circle of hell is also from the Divine Comedy, and that layer is called the Burning Wasteland. Chapter 206 God Bless the Pagans. The morning mist thickened. The ocean has a unique allure, capable of subtly distorting our perception of things. A waterspout that stretches from the sky to the ground, unless you've experienced it firsthand, appears to be nothing more than a distorted white line. A devastating storm, if you simply follow the current, will soon reveal its calm eye. While the outcome remains despairing, the experience is enough to make one forget the true nature of the storm. Similar phenomena occur with mirages, icebergs, and sea fog. The fog in Lee Robert Bay was not high, lingering over the islands and reefs, undulating with the waves. Judging from our ship's hull, the main body of this fog was probably less than 80 centimeters high, thinning as it ascended, becoming virtually indistinguishable to the naked eye at a height of more than a meter. Yet, it happened precisely over the islands and reefs, obscuring the normally visible low reefs beneath a vast haze. The once clear and winding channel disappeared, leaving only a few distinct protruding rocks and small islands. At this critical moment, the French defense fleet swooped in. Standing on the Badger's lookout, Nelson clutched his binoculars for a long, speechless moment. He had underestimated his opponent. When laying out the battlefield, Nelson believed he had assessed most of the variables at the start of the battle. From a military perspective, the French, with one Tier IV and one Tier V ship, held an overwhelming advantage over Halloween's 4 smaller vessels in both firepower and manpower. In terms of hydrographic intelligence, the away side could not possibly compete with their home opponents. A direct attack would inevitably lead to defeat, while a guerrilla attack would be difficult to achieve. From the moment the plan was submitted, Nelson understood the difficulty of victory. Yet, he submitted the plan for Operation Halloween, risking his life and Sir Parker's trust in a desperate effort to convince Fleet Command. This was due to his immense self-confidence, his conviction that he could narrow or even close the gap in strength between the two sides through tactics, courage, and determination. The Battle of Lee Robert epitomized all of this. In his plan, the French would be driven out in droves by the damage done to the Lucky Horseshoe, gazing at the human wind chimes at Hell's Gate before losing their minds and launching a powerful assault on the islands and reefs, relying on their powerful ships and artillery and their familiarity with the terrain. Given the French's advantages, such a risky move remained within the normal range of decision-making. It was just that the motivation for taking the risk was insufficient. That's why Nelson approved Lorraine's plan to bombard Lee Robert. From Lorraine's perspective, this might have been to eliminate potential risks and uncertainties in a decisive battle, but from Nelson's perspective, the devastation of the small towns on the mainland would be the key motivation for the French to rush into battle. He thought he had calculated everything: motives, positions, emotions, judgments, the advantages and disadvantages of both sides. He had forgotten to consider the people. Leo von Gavaudan, Admiral of the French Defense Fleet, Rear Admiral, Common Noble, Hereditary Count. According to British intelligence, Count Gavaudan was a fortunate man favored by the gods of war. He enlisted at the age of 16, a bastard son of his family. With no naval training, starting as a corporal. Over the next 20 years, he participated in 57 naval battles, winning or losing, his ships remaining unscathed and frequently achieving success. His career was a meteoric rise. At 29, he was knighted, made lieutenant commander, and became a captain. At 32, he became a baron, a lieutenant colonel, and at 33, he was transferred to the New World. At 38, he was knighted, made a viscount, and promoted to rear admiral. At 42, he was made a count for his contributions in suppressing bandits, commanding the defense fleet for over 5 years. Within the French Navy, the Count of Gévaudan was hardly a prodigy. He had a humble beginning, limited connections, and was not considered a prominent figure among his peers. Yet, he was a rare and steady man. Whether in war or politics, there were many who surpassed him, but it seemed impossible to find another man who had consistently led victories for 30 years. There must be a reason for this. It wasn't until he was suddenly attacked that Nelson finally realized that there must be a reason why this seemingly ordinary veteran could always find the hiding place of victory. This is an incredible talent. The width of the island belt is about 10 kilometers, and the straight-line distance between the bay entrance and Lee Robert is over 100 kilometers. The fire burned so fiercely last night that I could hear the cannon fire and see the flames. It's impossible that those outside the bay were unaware of Lee Robert's fate. The Family Glory didn't issue an advance warning. Its whereabouts were obviously exposed, and it was most likely sunk, the source of the information. Landing outside the bay and entering and exiting Lee Robert by land would only take 2 or 3 hours with a fast horse. Assuming that the Family Glory was sunk more than 12 hours ago, Gévaudan would have had enough time to grasp all the information in the bay. He endured the humiliation of the Gate of Hell, watching Lee Robert burn to the ground and hundreds of French pioneers die in the flames of war. He knew that our strength was far inferior to his, and there was no possibility of winning a head-on battle. Under such circumstances, he still waited for the most favorable opportunity to appear, although the sea fog increases the risk for his fleet passing through the reef zone. With launches leading the way and his detailed knowledge of the hydrography, it's not an insurmountable obstacle, but we've lost detailed information about the channel, and most importantly, without a clear exit, we can't achieve a complete blockade. Furthermore, the Golden Hind, our most powerful ship, is currently incapacitated, and the Lucky Horseshoe is pursuing a slave ship. To protect the Golden Hind, it won't be able to join the blockade anytime soon. The Badger and the Wasp, 3 channels, a breach of the reef zone is inevitable. Cold-blooded general, a brilliant choice. Is this the favor bestowed upon you by the god of victory? I've learned, Nelson muttered to himself in a chaotic manner, making no effort to organize his words, nor to tell anyone. He simply wanted to tell himself that the enemy had already taken the initiative in this decisive battle. His advantage was gone, and every decision he made would be a matter of life and death. At that moment, the first mate, who was presiding over the situation on deck, suddenly climbed the mast himself. Admiral, urgent report from the Golden Hind, Guildmaster Drake reports. First, ground attack mission completed, Golden Hind begins naval combat readjustment, estimated time 50 minutes. Second, I want the Jupiter. If Admiral is willing, I can exchange it for the Andes. I hope you approve. Report completed. Nelson was stunned. Even if the elite British Navy were tasked with 50 minutes, they would only be able to complete the artillery and center of gravity adjustments. This meant that Lorraine was ready to stand on the messy deck and join the battle. The Golden Hind's combat effectiveness was reduced by at least 20%. Furthermore, they had just finished a night of fighting, and their physical strength, energy, mental state, and desire were at a low point. Would the sailors be willing to participate? Even if they did, their combat effectiveness would be reduced by at least 30%. Did Lorraine really intend to use the Golden Hind at 50% of its combat power to fight the 60-gun frigate Andes alone? This madman who always claimed to put safety first was actually so decisive and confident in a life-or-death situation? How could he possibly lose to you? Nelson laughed, a cold smile that hung on the corners of his mouth, his skin moving but his flesh not moving, making it hard to tell whether it was sincere or deliberately mocking. He took out his pocket watch and glanced at the time. How is the enemy distributed? Channel 5 has 2 brig-class frigates, advancing slowly. Channel 1 has the galleon-class destroyer Jupiter, also advancing slowly. Channel 4 has the French flagship, the galleon-class frigate Andes and a brig-class ship, all confirmed. You are determined to win. Count Gévaudan. Nelson put away his pocket watch. Time, 5:27. Order the Wasp to blockade Channel 5 and not to take the initiative to contact the enemy ship in Channel 4. The Badger will weigh anchor and blockade Channel 1. This order must be executed immediately without delay. Yes, draft a document and have the stormtroopers hand it to Drake personally. The main content, just tell him that I will transfer the stormtroopers from the Badger to him. If he can really sink or capture the Andes, then after the battle is won, the Jupiter will be his reward without any additional cost. Yes, the decisive battle has begun. Nelson took a deep breath. Please ask Lieutenant Friend to tell Drake, just this once, may God bless him. Chapter 207 Captain Style. In the morning light, the mighty French frigate sailed freely through the foggy ocean, like a demon from the abyss peering into the human world. Its form was invisible, but its spirit was already there. The island belt in Lee Robert Bay was so vast that upon entering, only the lookouts of the various ships could track their ships. It wasn't until an hour later that the crews of the Badger and Wasp were able to confirm the enemy's presence from the decks. The drums of war gradually rose. 5 kilometers away, heading northeast, 2 enemy tracks have been spotted in Channel 5. Bow images compared, Brig-class frigate Crete and Brig-class frigate Echo. The enemy ships are moving at a relative speed of 1.6 knots, and we expect to engage within 2 hours. Collingwood shook open his windbreaker with a swish, leaning on the hilt of his sword, his chest straight. Everyone on the ship will rotate between 2 shifts, 1 hour each. Meals, confessions, and naps are permitted. Mark the exit of Channel 5, a 1-kilometer stretch. Roll the ship sideways, occupying the T-head, ready the starboard gun ports, man the main deck gun positions, and distribute the muskets. In this battle, they are our only opponents. Brig's 9-pound bowgun poses little threat to us. The channel isn't wide enough for 2 ships to sail side by side, let alone for a battleship to lie sideways. As long as we lock the channel, we will have an absolute advantage. Now, we reiterate the British Marine Code: respect the enemy, trust your comrades, and fear no sacrifice. God bless England. HMS Wasp, forward, forward. The battleship roared to life with Collingwood's passionate declaration. The sailors raced with abandon, and the officers' shouts echoed through the air. The Wasp steadily approached the islands and reefs. Launch boats carrying skilled sailors were lowered, rowing straight into the foggy sea. Meanwhile, on the other side of the reef, Nelson observed the dark shadow of the Jupiter for the first time from his deck. As both outstanding young officers, his command style differed markedly from that of his friend Collingwood, sharper, more direct, aggressive yet rigid and precise. Our opponent is the French's latest Tyrvee ship, armed with 46 guns, including an 18-pound main gun. More importantly, it's equipped with 2 18-pound bow guns, 18-pound medium-range guns, with a range of 800 meters at 4 degrees and 1,400 meters at 8 degrees. Loaded with solid ammunition, any direct hit will easily shatter the Badger's hull, causing significant damage to us. We won't allow it to venture beyond the channel, nor will we be allowed to engage it at a T-shaped point. Our safe haven lies within the 30-degree blind spot on either side of its bow. We must maintain our position, wait for the opportunity, and ultimately decide the outcome through boarding. There will be no reinforcements in this battle. Great Britain demands the loyalty of every sailor. Please write your last words and be prepared to die in battle. Now, please clarify the order of rotation for each post. 4 posts will rotate, with each post lasting 30 minutes. Run, gentlemen. His Majesty awaits news of our victory, the knight awaits news of our victory, and I await news of our victory. May God bless us. Yes, sir. There were no proclamations, no admonitions, but like its allies, the Golden Hind was bustling with activity. Merchant sailors have always been more motivated than their warship counterparts, thanks to higher pay, better security, and fewer whips. Sailors cherish the opportunity to serve in a formal chamber of commerce, and this cherishment gives them greater endurance. The Drake Chamber of Commerce surpasses 90% of large chambers of commerce in terms of security and pensions, so their sailors are more willing to work overtime unconditionally. Even without prior psychological preparation, dissatisfaction is less likely to accumulate. Of course, a decline in efficiency is inevitable. Lorraine did not interfere too much with this inevitable fatigue. After announcing the order to resume the battle, he retreated to the captain's cabin until Lieutenant Fran arrived on board with Nelson's order and necessary intelligence. The 4th-class frigate Andes was built in 1750 and entered service in 1753. The original design was a French 3rd-class battleship with 60 guns. After modernization in 1765, it was adjusted to 56 guns. The number of guns was slightly reduced, and the firepower was greatly improved. This ship adopts a fully enclosed gun compartment design with 2 floors. The lower deck is equipped with 24 24-pound long guns, and the upper deck is equipped with 18 12-pound long guns and 8 9-pound long guns. In addition, there are 2 18-pound medium guns at the bow, with a shooting arc of 120 degrees in front, and 4 18-pound short guns at the stern, with a shooting arc of 180 degrees. Lorraine threw the information in his hand with a sneer, crossed his legs, and wiped away the coffee that was almost cold. The Dominion-class's paper statistics are quite consistent with the wealth and opulence of the converted ships of that era, but I have a copy here too. 52 meters long, 9 meters wide, 350 sailors fully loaded, top speed 8.5, minimum speed 0.5, and below average stability and wave resistance. As a 4th-class ship converted from a previous generation, the Andes is more like a child swinging a sledgehammer. My Golden Hind has a chance of victory, and I'm happy to accept the job, but the extra risk shouldn't be free. Lorraine laughed. So besides the orders, the Admiral should have a gift for me, Lieutenant, am I right? Lieutenant Friend twitched his lips, blushing, and reluctantly pulled out the hidden document. This is the Admiral's promise. He asked me to hand it to you personally, but the first mate believes that fighting is the duty of every Englishman. If you don't ask for it, letting you know this promise would be a disgrace to patriots. So, long live the humiliation. Lorraine glanced at it and laughed. A few minutes later, the Golden Hind's adjustments were suspended, and all 280 sailors and crew gathered on deck, awaiting Lorraine's final oath-taking. Lorraine began by issuing a battle order. Order, Captain Judea, to eliminate the enemy in front of you within 25 minutes. The former captive's request is nullified. All means of defeating the enemy are permitted, and he will make the decision on the spot. The messenger shouted, Yes, Captain. Lorraine waved the messenger away, leaned forward against the railing, and with a loose grip, he unfolded Nelson's letter of commitment. He said lazily, I just gave up a readily available Baige-type slave ship. It has a market value of £5,000, a huge asset. Does anyone know why? A hushed silence fell. Limited by their positions and status, sailors were already unable to see the full scope of the war, making it difficult for them to express appropriate opinions in such a situation. Not to mention that Lorraine's expression and tone clearly showed he wasn't expecting an answer. As an employee of the Drake Chamber of Commerce, who would go against their boss's wishes during a war? Afraid of not receiving their compensation? Everyone waited in silence, each with their own thoughts. Sure enough, when no one spoke, Lorraine's expression brightened noticeably. The feast has begun, he said with a slightly nervous laugh. At dawn, the French defense fleet officially penetrated the island chain. We can no longer completely trap them. A decisive battle in the bay is inevitable, and the estimated time is 2 hours. The Admiral has given us the glorious mission of sinking the enemy flagship. This means that if we don't want the island defense line to be completely overthrown, we have about 30 minutes to adjust the Golden Hind center of gravity. As for the remaining debris, we can only risk it while sailing. This will be a desperate battle, and in recognition of our contribution, the Admiral has prepared a generous reward for us. Jupiter. Lorraine suddenly straightened his back and slammed his palm against a railing. As a galleon of the same class as the Golden Hind, the Jupiter has a market value of £25,000. She will become a shared treasure of the Chamber of Commerce, and you. Cheers shook the heavens and earth. Through the long-term sailors on board, they had long heard of Lorraine's actions in Hebasi. They strictly adhered to the line between obligations and non-obligations, not infringing on the legitimate rights of the sailors. Although the calculation method still favored the Chamber of Commerce, it was the Chamber's gains, thanks to its reputation and connections. The sailors who had benefited greatly could easily discern the connection. What the sailors were surprised to see was that, years later, Lorraine would reiterate the idea of a shared profit in this mercenary war. Complying with the Chamber of Commerce's policies and accepting state employment was clearly a sailor's obligation. The Chamber of Commerce had a comprehensive compensation agreement, and even if Lorraine hadn't proposed a shared profit plan, the sailors would have had no objection. But he proposed it anyway. The sailors suddenly realized that a duel between the Golden Hind and the enemy flagship in open waters must have exceeded the original battle plan. Therefore, Lorraine viewed it as an additional risk, and thus the military reward as an additional benefit. With such a fair boss, what more could the employees ask for? The sailors cheered and leaped for joy. their eyes fixed on Lorraine, eager for further distribution plans. Lorraine paused for a moment. The ship's pay will be divided into 3 parts, 20% of which will be paid to those who died in this battle, and the remaining 80% will be divided equally into 2 parts, one for the crew on the ship and the other for the Chamber of Commerce. That is to say, every crew member who survives to see victory will receive an additional reward of £35 and 14 shillings. Long live! Listening to the cheers of the sailors, Lorraine threw another heavy pound. In addition, the Chamber of Commerce will release another 100 long-term contracts to reward crew members who played an important role in this battle. Long live! A guaranteed annual salary of £60, a family contract, an education subsidy for 1 child, better protection and treatment. All of this belongs only to the warriors who survive to the end. Long live! Look, the feast is just around the corner, and danger comes with opportunity. I will command you to victory, and all you have to do is do your best to implement my orders and seize this victory. Drake, brave sailors, what should you say now? Lorraine's question pushed the atmosphere on the ship to a climax, and the sailors raised their bright headscarves and waved them vigorously towards the sky. Golden Deer. Forward. Chapter 208 Capitalist Thinking and Justice. In Lorraine's view, any problem that can be solved with money isn't a problem at all. This wasn't a manifesto of an evil capitalist, but rather, a reflection of his experience across 2 lives, a realization that money was originally designed to solve problems. The cost of time, the cost of creativity, the cost of execution, the cost of risk, the cost of data, all the factors humans need to solve problems can ultimately be converted into money. The power of universal equivalence is terrifying. With this understanding, Lorraine's thinking inevitably leaned towards the perspective of a conscientious capitalist. When the sailors were exhausted, they liberalized the supply of coffee and tea, while also distributing rum per person and using biostimulants to stimulate their spirits. When the lucky horseshoe was pinned down, they forego the readily available small profits and opted for a more optimal solution with increased risk and proportionally increased profits. This equates money with a priceless value of life, but in this era, there's nothing wrong with that. Pricelessness implies volatility, and variability implies peaks and valleys. In this era, the value of human life is undoubtedly at its lowest point. Life is worthless. On the British mainland, children with boundless potential were treated as mere expendable labor. Across the vast non-white world, labor was valued at just £5 to £15. Sailors were considered the most valuable skilled trades of the era, prompting navies to use whips and torture to kidnap them, while pirates offered limited democracy and freedom. The Chamber of Commerce offered the most humane employment, but the average salary for sailors in the industry barely approached a middle-class annual wage of 27 to 32 British pounds. Over 70% of employment contracts lack provisions for security, promotion, or pensions. In other words, sailors, like soldiers, risked their lives for a salary, yet not only were they denied respect, but their future was also threatened. In this regard, the Drake Chamber of Commerce was ahead of its time from its inception. While Lorraine didn't deliberately offer sailors above market pay, even when funds were scarce, she never withheld promised pensions. After the Habashi expedition, having earned her first fortune, Lorraine was no longer burdened by financial constraints, finally able to pursue her vision. This concept is the Drake Chamber of Commerce's unique professional employment contract, or sailor's long contract. This contract is a hallmark of the Drake Chamber of Commerce's corporate culture, fundamentally differentiating them from their peers in the employment environment for sailors. The professional employment contract is a comprehensive employment contract primarily for sailors, but not exclusively. The initial contract lasts 5 years and, in addition to a high annual salary of £60, offers 18 months of salary renewal and a disability transfer option, with no termination. Furthermore, initial contracts offer 2 special benefits. First, long-term sailors can refer an adult family member to obtain a special family contract without a test. While the annual salary for a family contract is only £12, as a land-based position, the Chamber provides below-average food and accommodation, relatively regular get-off-work schedules, 1 day off per week, and annual leave equal to 3 times the length of service, for a maximum of 15 days. These benefits created a stable, family-oriented income stream, ensuring that even if a long-term sailor died while on the road, his family could survive under the Chamber's care, in addition to receiving a pension. Furthermore, long-term sailors could nominate a minor family member for free education at the Chamber. The chamber had its own employee school in Southampton, and a school in Kingston was also under construction. This specialized, 2-year vocational school offered courses in theology, mathematics, sales, accounting, hospitality, and administration. Women also received additional training in dance, fashion, and makeup, while men received training in combat, shipbuilding, and carpentry. Furthermore, long-term employees could also nominate students at their own expense, no longer restricted to direct family members. However, the full tuition cost a staggering £30, making it unaffordable for most employees' families unless they earned a full scholarship by achieving first place in their subject. Lorraine offered these two benefits to outstanding employees loyal to the chamber, offering them a rosy picture of security and education, freeing them from the constant fear of life and allowing them to dream of a stable, high-quality life above ground. Furthermore, the contents of the seaman's contract extend far beyond the initial contract. Employees who complete 5 years of service, or who receive a recommendation from a branch director or higher during their service, are eligible for a lifetime contract extension. Renewal is no longer limited to a specific number of years, extending to 50 for men and 45 for women. During the contract period, the employee's guaranteed annual salary increases to £80, and their family contracts are upgraded to the initial contract of a long-term contract. The employee is also allowed to recommend all minors of their direct family line for free education. Upon the expiration of the renewal contract, the Chamber of Commerce offers a special re-employment contract for exceptionally talented or dedicated individuals. This offers a guaranteed annual salary of £200, full medical and funeral coverage, and a lifetime of prosperity for employees who demonstrate loyalty and usefulness to the Chamber. Lorraine, with these 3 publicly disclosed contracts, has successfully established the Drake Chamber of Commerce as the most cohesive of the mid-sized chambers, a favorite choice for talented sailors. He has considered the possibility of other chambers following suit. However, most truly top-tier chambers of commerce have their own talent development systems, and few chambers of commerce of the same caliber boast greater financial resources than his. The speed of information dissemination in this era is incomparable to that of later generations. Over a year after the contract launch, Drake remains a unique presence in the talent market. Perhaps, this is how those top chambers of commerce establish their talent development systems? Lorraine didn't know. He only knew that even without proposing solutions like work-related injuries, medical care, housing, and universal pensions, which would have placed enormous strain on the chamber's finances, he had successfully won over the hearts and minds of the people, even though the chamber had signed fewer than 300 initial contracts and fewer than 20 renewals to date. Especially after the establishment of the Caribbean branch. The first wave of long-term sailors, led by Leonard's father, arrived ashore and were given important positions. Morale and motivation were never a problem on his ship. The sailors openly supported and cooperated with him. Whether participating in treasonous smuggling operations or undertaking difficult combat missions, fighting day and night, the sailors gladly accepted and gave their all, dedicating themselves to Lorraine's will. Clearly, their partnership had solidified, forged with money and culminating in affection. Lorraine knew that he held the hopes of countless sailors for a family and a career. He had no obligation to fulfill these hopes, but in the process of his own success, he would surely fulfill them. Like a savior. Towards the stern, the plume of smoke from the sunken slave ship was fading. From the bow, the roar of cannons rumbled. The blockade of the 1st and 5th channels had begun. In the decisive battle of the 4th channel, the massive Andes had already broken free from the island reefs. The timing was perfect. Lorraine glanced at the flags fluttering from the mastheads. The vibrant Union Jack, symbolizing naval status, hung on the mainmast, the foremast, the pansy representing the Chamber of Commerce's employment status. The red and white St. George's Guard, representing the Golden Hind's homeland, hung on the mizzenmast. The hint was clear enough. Compared to badgers and wasps that fight to the death and are prone to fighting to the death, armed merchant ships that generally lack fighting will and combat level are obviously more suitable targets for sacrifice. For the sake of victory, come and sink me. Lorraine looked at the Andes that was getting closer and closer, and his mind magically broke away from the combat state. What should be done next? Guide the sailors to form a crew union? The union is the inevitable product after the treatment of employees has developed to a certain level. Because it is becoming more and more difficult to negotiate with capitalists, the naturally weak sailors must unite and jointly pursue collective demands. Lorraine covered his mouth and fell into deep thought. Since the emergence of the Union is a historical inevitability, then it would be more beneficial for me to guide the establishment, such as making it easier to steal the leadership of the Union, design an election system that is beneficial to capital, and let the Union deteriorate in advance. What else? Murmuring, the decisive battle is about to begin. Chapter 209 Attack. Target distance 2400, relative speed 5.5. Approaching. Prepare for engagement, captain's orders. Deck in position, guns in place. Stormtroopers collect their muskets and stand by in the mess hall. All posts confirm their positions, abandon the boats. Check the sails and rigging. All ships engage in mobile warfare, be prepared for impact, be prepared for impact, be prepared for rollover, 10 minutes warning before engagement. Final roll call at all posts, shouts echoed, the tension rising. The Golden Hind square sails were set to their full height, the sails bulging with the wind, lifting the bow and smashing the oncoming waves. Lorraine, draped in the captain's trench coat, stood at the tip of the bow, facing the wind. His foot rested on the forward of the figurehead, one hand gripping the deer's antlers, the other clenching his long sword. Despite the wind and waves, his figure remained unmoved. A magnificent oil painting of a naval battle unfolded before his eyes. In the upper left corner of the painting, a swirling cloud and wind tug at the wind, connecting the sky above and the sea below. Beyond the horizon, the rumble of artillery roars, like a landslide, like thunder. The battle at the mouth of Channel 1 must be raging. Nelson's Badger, alone in a narrow area, confronts the Jupiter, which outmatches him in every way. With nowhere to retreat or escape, the situation is as difficult as that of the Golden Hind. This young general, destined for history, possesses a charisma befitting his historical stature. Naturally, he accepted the most restrictive battlefield, willingly sacrificing himself for victory. Even more concerning, Lorraine still cannot guarantee Nelson's safe return. Did the Battle of Lee Robert actually occur in history? Operation Halloween aimed to defeat the French defense fleet. Given the relative strength of the two sides, Nelson's initiation of this operation could only have been driven by hopes for either the Golden Hind or Lorraine. What are the chances of the historical Lorraine ever meeting the young Nelson? What are the chances of someone piloting an elite Tier V ship appearing in these waters at this time? If Lorraine hadn't existed in Nelson's past, could he have found a suitable replacement? Would that replacement strength and credibility suffice for him to embark on a risky plan like Operation Halloween? There are too many conditions, too many limitations. Lorraine doesn't believe he has the ability to shift the heavy wheel of history right now, but if it's just to influence one or two individual lives, it seems a piece of cake given the Drake Chamber of Commerce's current size. What if? Lorraine suddenly thought of an intriguing question: does history determine destiny, or does destiny shape history? If Nelson had ultimately perished in this insignificant war, would England's fate have changed? In a future Trafalgar, would anyone be able to stop Napoleon's ambition to dominate the world? The answer seemed obvious. Lorraine shook his head in boredom, his interest suddenly waning. So-called great men are merely the lucky few chosen by current events. They may push history forward, leave their mark, and change humanity, but first, they must stand out from the countless candidates. This is fundamentally different from the philosophical questions of which came first, the chicken or the egg, or the universe or humanity. After Nelson's death, there will always be Collingwood or another outstanding general to step forward. The great cause of the British Empire wasn't forged by the miracle of Trafalgar, and Napoleon's glory and fall weren't altered by a single cannonball or two. This is historical materialism. With this understanding, the smoke in the upper left corner regained its reality in Lorraine's eyes. No longer were there the whirlwind of winds and clouds, even the rumble of artillery became faint. After all, the two battlefields were separated by a full dozen kilometers. Compared to this, the fierce battle in the lower right corner of the painting was clearly more realistic. Collingwood was at the entrance to Channel No. 5, facing two opponents alone, a single-handed defense. Huge splashes of water erupted on the turbulent sea. The Wasp furled its sails, lowered its anchor, and, like a bolt, laid across the center of the flower field, forcibly blocking the enemy's access. Lorraine could hear the French's deep despair in the roar of their guns. The narrow channel made it impossible to maneuver sideways, and the brig's bow 12-pounder had little effect against the Wasp of the same class. The Wasp, however, could unleash its 18-pounder cannon, unleashing a barrage of fire that raged with the desire to fight. The channel left the French with little room to maneuver, and given the sheer volume of projectiles, even the option of risking their lives on the boarding board was impractical. Once within the Wasp's 300-meter effective range, they would likely be met by a dozen red-hot, heavy shells, escalating at the British rate of 2 or 3 per minute until they were driven to the bottom of the sea. The battlefield there was absurd. Both sides shared a firm belief in serving their country and sacrificing themselves, but for the greater good, these brave warriors unanimously chose the most perfunctory tactics. A pinpoint artillery engagement at a range of 800 meters, with a probability of impact of less than 1 in 1,000. These two statistics alone are enough to make this battle a memorable event in Collingwood's military career. And it was Lorraine who directly caused this situation. After a relentless pursuit, the Golden Hind and the Lucky Horseshoe finally entered the fray at the very beginning of the battle, successfully blocking the 4th Channel's escape route to the 5th Channel. The timing of their entry into the fray was impeccable. The flustered Golden Hind commanded the Andes' undivided attention. The upside was that Lorraine didn't have to worry about the further widening gap between the enemy and her own after merging with Collingwood. The downside. The Andes dominated the battlefield painting. The massive Andes lay before the Golden Hind, already meticulously preparing for her bombardment. Her densely packed broadside gun ports were uniformly open, their black muzzles pointed forward, waiting for any reckless prey to stumble into optimal range. Killing intent filled the air. Lorraine spat softly, "Tisk. You clearly consider me a layman, yet you still put yourself in a safe defensive position. Is this the warlike qualities of a veteran?" Lorraine recalled the intelligence reports on the Count of Gévaudan's life, an unremarkable man, unseeking merit, yet never making a major mistake, his record illustrious. He was undoubtedly a formidable opponent, just like the Andes across the way. Clearly a clumsy beast with nothing but power. He easily negated Lorraine's advantage with a simple counterattack. With Gévaudan in control, the planned assault had little chance of success. The second option was a detour. The Andes, with its full square-rigged sails, had given up racing, but its swaggering fore and aft sails, bowsail, and densely packed maneuvers between the masts retained its ability to turn quickly. This meant that Lorraine would have difficulty regaining the initiative through maneuver. So, what about a gradual retreat, luring the enemy out of their lair? A sudden burst of artillery fire reminded Lorraine that they were within 3 kilometers of the Wasp. If Lorraine dared to retreat, Gévaudan would abandon him and head straight for Channel 5. This wasn't just speculation. As if fearing Lorraine wouldn't anticipate this, the Andes' bow was now pointed squarely at the Wasp, like a woman undressing in a dark alley, her identity impossible for any man to misunderstand. "Damn veteran. Damn steady," Lorraine cursed through gritted teeth, his voice merging with Pierce's on the lookout. "Target range 500, relative speed 4.7 knots, engage." All his wild thoughts vanished with the call to engage. A warrior's mission is to fight, and so does a merchant's mission, nothing more. So, left rudder, cut the wind. Keep your distance. Lorraine drew his long sword with a clang, pointing it directly in the Andes' direction. Starboard, fire, attack. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 210 Unfavorable Tea. Starboard side under fire, a shrill cry rang out. Lorraine looked up to see white smoke rising from the opposite side. More than 10 red dots, accompanied by the sound of cannon fire, streaked across the sky, hurtling towards them with a low whistling sound. 10 degrees left, evasive, with the order, Henna jerked the hand wheel, and the Golden Hind's hull tilted, gliding outward, hugging the edge of the wind. A splash. Centered on the gliding Golden Hind, a dozen massive sprays of water, swirling with heat mist, erupted, sending waves rising several meters high, striking the Golden Hind's hull like heavy fists. Hold your feet. Hold the rigging. Full starboard rudder. Starboard, ready to fire, the Golden Hind, still struggling to stabilize, steered to starboard at an extreme angle. Its bulging sails cut through the wind, and after a moment's lull, it quickly cut into another angle of the wind, accelerating sharply. The distance between the two ships rapidly closed, from 530 meters to around 460 meters in the blink of an eye. The Golden Hind starboard list began to level out, and the starboard guns, reloaded, rose proudly at Atron's command. Fire, Lorraine's command came the instant the ship regained its balance. The gunners scrambled to cock their flints, and the starboard guns rolled out one by one. Boom 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 boom. 10 18-pounders, 6 12-pounders, 16 shells of varying sizes unleashed their barrels, and like a replay of the scene just before, they pelted the water surrounding the Andes. The two continued to close, 430, 410, 360, 320 meters. Lorraine's expression suddenly changed. Hannah, 5 degrees of port, slingshot, quick, but the command seemed to be a step too late. The instant Lorraine gave the order, the Andes, still maintaining its T-shaped maneuver, suddenly unleashed a more intense barrage of shells. A shower of projectiles flew in the direction the Golden Hind was heading, shattering the sea surface. The Golden Hind adjusted its course just in time, narrowly avoiding the impact point. At closest range, the bow was less than 10 meters from the water. Raging waves crashed over, shaking the deck violently, and the fleeing sailors screamed and fell in a heap. Acheron, clutching his shoulder, gritted his teeth as he climbed out of the gun bay, grabbing Lorraine's hand. "Captain. 3 of my gunners were injured, 1 with a direct eye injury. Why the sudden change of plans? I need an explanation." Lorraine gestured fearfully at the receding impact zone. "We had a close call. We almost got hit head-on by a 24-pounder, veteran, Lorraine gasped, calling to the ship's doctor, Daniel, to examine Acheron's injuries first. He then strode over to Hannah, holding onto the railing and barking orders. "Keep turning left to cut a wind and bring the engagement distance back to 500 meters. Gave Auden, you're foolproof." Half an hour after the battle began, the 3 battlefields in Lee Robert Bay remained orderly, and no accidents that could change the situation occurred. Nelson, who was in the First Channel battle, was out of Lorraine's sight, and the observation sailor on the mizzenmast was keeping a close eye on that battlefield. The Badger had not sunk so far, and its hull was agile, and it did not seem to have suffered any direct hits that affected its evasion. Collingwood, who was in the Fifth Channel battle, was within Lorraine's sight. Combined with the intelligence from the foremast lookout, she still had the absolute initiative, and even if the battle lasted a day and a night, there might not be any unexpected changes. After all, in the era of muzzle-loading guns, it was impossible to head a target 800 meters away by luck alone. The most intense battle was naturally the Fourth Channel battle, which was in a state of mobile warfare. The Golden Hind led the attack, capitalizing on the strong pre-storm winds, circling clockwise at an average speed of over 5 knots, maintaining a distance of 300 to 500 meters from the Andes, looking for an opportunity to board. The Andes held her ground, using her variator to maintain delicate maneuvers in the narrow sea area, 2 ship widths wide, always maintaining a T-shaped heading towards the Golden Hind. In the back-and-forth artillery exchange, she only deployed half her guns. Only when the Golden Hind attempted a close assault would her densely packed guns open, unleashing a dense and precise T-shaped barrage. Facing a genuine naval power in actual combat for the first time, Lorraine felt firsthand the feeling of powerlessness that enveloped him like a net. He knew full well that the source of all this powerlessness lay in the 24-pounder guns in the Andes's gun bays. The 24-pounder naval flintlock long-range gun had a barrel length of 2.7 meters, a caliber of 14.4 centimeters, and was cast iron. It weighed 2.2 tons and was equipped with 12-pounder solid, chain, and 24-pounder grapeshot shells. Its maximum range was 300 to 1,800 meters. The French standard rate of fire was 120 rounds per second, while the British standard was 60 rounds per second. In England's military inventory, the 24 and 32-pounder guns were classified as heavy naval guns, first-class items, not intended for civilian use. Also included on this special list were military charts, battleships of rank II and above, Britain's unique 48 and 68-pounder rail-mounted naval mortars, Army light artillery under 9-pounder, and the latest shrapnel grenades. This list demonstrates the importance European powers attach to heavy artillery-class naval firepower. Heavy artillery was a national treasure. As the only naval weapon capable of shattering a battleship's hull, the great powers invested heavily in it, and each nation's guns possessed unique characteristics. For example, French guns were more accurate, and their unique bronze formula effectively reduced the weight of individual guns, further simplifying the process and difficulty of precise aiming for the gunners. British guns featured unique recoil rails and mountings, which not only increased stability but also significantly increased reloading speed, thereby increasing the ship's firepower density per unit time. Dutch guns, on the other hand, employed unique operating procedures, allowing the crew size to be reduced from the standard 12 to 7 without compromising firing effectiveness. These were considered core secrets by various nations, forbidden from being disclosed or freely accessible to the public. The Dutch's weak sense of confidentiality and the government's lack of control over major trade associations led to the widespread leakage of core technologies, indirectly triggering a revolution in gunnery and naval history and, in turn, contributing to the Dutch's decline. Ultimately, Lorraine's only means of defeating the Andes was a boarding engagement, with victory guaranteeing capture. According to the mercenary principle and the agreement with Nelson, he would retain ownership of both the Andes and the Jupiter. He could capture the Jupiter intact, but the Andes was a classified vessel, and its 24-pounder guns had to be handed over to the Navy. But Lorraine had no time to dwell on such matters. The heavy artillery threat was imminent. Rather than considering the consequences of victory and the gains and losses, he was more concerned with surviving these lethal weapons and achieving his objectives. Tisk, there's nothing I can do. Another volley of heavy artillery fire arrived. Due to the distance between the two sides, most of it landed within 100 meters of the Golden Hind. Only 2 landed within the 100-meter warning zone, one at 70 meters and one over 50 meters, posing little threat. Lorraine was able to closely observe the Andes's gun ports, obscured by gun smoke. As expected, once the Golden Hind had regained distance, the Andes resumed its usual steady pace of fire. Each round lasted approximately 130 to 140 seconds, slightly slower than the French standard of 2 minutes for heavy artillery fire, and adhered to a strict 1-2-1 firing rhythm, firing only half of the gun ports at a time. This meant that half the opposing ship's guns were constantly at rest. Even if Lorraine made a sudden move, she would have to contend with 6 24-pounders. A single direct hit would be enough to cripple the Golden Hind, leaving it reeling. A plan to break the deadlock. At the Golden Hind's current speed, a 500-meter assault would take at least 3 minutes to reach the ship. The Andes could easily launch a first, saturation bombardment from 300 meters away, reload within 100 meters, and then fire a second round. A T-shaped charge would be a major disadvantage for the upright ship, as its fixed course made it extremely difficult for the Golden Hind to evade the attack. French professional soldiers were renowned for their accuracy. At a distance of 100 meters, their reported average hit rate was well over 5%. It was like dancing on a sharp edge. While he pondered, another round of bombardment began. Temporarily deprived of Atron's command, the Golden Hind's shells landed in increasingly scattered patterns, while the Andes maintained its usual level of fire, creating a hail of water within a 200-meter radius. At least, we can't let them fire so leisurely anymore. Lorraine bit his lip and raised his hand to hold back a running sailor. Go to the ship's doctor's office and find Captain Desses, he spoke word by word. If his injuries have been treated, have him report to me immediately. I'll wait for him in 10 minutes, yes. Chapter 211. Be my eyes. Lorraine soon spotted Atron, his arm in a sling and splinted. Daniel's handling suggested his injuries were more serious than they appeared. His pale face and damp hair plastered to his forehead made Lorraine worried about his ability to handle the upcoming mission. What's wrong? A fracture. Atron's body trembled imperceptibly. Because time is short, we've only ruled out a fracture for now. How did you rule it out? Please, don't ask. Lorraine saw hell in Atron's eyes. But ruling out a fracture was at least a good thing from a practical perspective. Lorraine straightened his composure and towed Atron to starboard. The Andes stretched across the sea within sight. Tall, majestic, impetuous, and unwieldy, like the great mountain range that spans North and South America, the very image of her name. Another round of shells lashed out, but Henna delicately turned the hand wheel, and the Golden Hind snaked through the wind and waves, easily escaping the impact zone. How do you feel? Lorraine asked. It's so despairingly easy. Atron took a deep breath. Captain, don't you think there's even a sliver of chance of victory? At 100 meters, there's over a 50% chance of a direct hit from a 24-pounder. While probabilities aren't simply summed up, it doesn't matter. With lives at stake, there's no room for error. Simply put, advancing is death. Atron nodded in agreement. That's about right, but you still have the lucky horseshoe. If things don't work out, Odin's brig is pinned to the rear of the Andes, waiting for me to launch the lucky horseshoe first. Lorraine opened his arms. We each have a free pawn. It seems like if the timing is right, we could push it to the bottom of the board and become queen, but in reality, that chance doesn't exist. If either brig loses its composure, they'll become targets of concentrated fire. They're merely intimidating pieces, not leverage to change the outcome of the battle. In chess, castling, Atron offered a second suggestion. Switch positions with a wasp. Lorraine laughed dumbly. Leave the golden deer idle in the 5th channel, do our best to tie down the 3 brigs on both ends, and then let our 2 brigs try to challenge the opposite 24-pounders. Once it comes to actual combat, it really sounds like a bad idea. Yatron spread out his only movable arm. I'm just a gunner. You are the commander. Please tell me, what difficult task do you want me to complete? How about silencing those annoying 24-pounders? Yatron blinked awkwardly. Captain, I've long suspected your mission would be somewhat impractical, but, at a distance of 500 meters, you expect me to use an 18-pounder to penetrate oak planks at least 10 centimeters thick. I'll personally steer the ship and repeatedly create a stable firing environment for you at 300 meters. Lorraine paused. But I might be a bit rough before we achieve stability. And you know, every time we get in close, the chance of us being destroyed increases. Are you confident we can complete the mission before we're sunk? What other answer can I have? Yatron smiled wryly and saluted. Hang up the hammocks. Hang them sideways to create a buffer. Yatron ran back to the gun bay with his arm in a sling, and upon entering, he began to yell incoherently. The more hammocks, the better. Tie them up tight. And, have someone check the port gun rigging. Reinforce them if necessary. Don't let them become a burden. Insufficient manpower? Go to the 12-pounders on deck. What use can those small guns have against a 4th-tier ship? Prioritize the 18-pounders, and personal restraints. If you don't want to be crushed to death by the guns you operate, every man must prepare at least 2 rigging for himself. This is an order, an order. His voice grew increasingly agitated, his expression increasingly ferocious. The gunners had never seen the carefree Atron act like this before. They were momentarily stunned and frantically carried out his orders. The elders aboard the Papillionity clearly sensed the desperate signal. They quickly completed their tasks and gathered around Atron. Gunner, is the captain preparing to storm? There's no opportunity to storm yet. Atron gritted his teeth, tied his useless left arm tightly to his chest, and tied 3 knots with one hand. We have to create opportunities. The old men suddenly cheered up. What should we do? I will personally command gun positions 5 and 6. All the best men will be assigned to them. The other guns will provide coordinated cover. He had barely finished his words when an order came from the upper deck. Captain's order. Combat in 10 minutes. All crew members, recheck the rigging. Repeat, recheck the rigging. The old men looked at each other in bewilderment, and Atron quickly tightened the rigging around his waist. Well, that's it. The captain is much wilder than we imagined. All our courtesies couldn't win the heart of this beauty this time, so he's angry. Yes, he's planning to storm the manor and force himself on her. On the stern deck, Lorraine took the handwheel from Henna. The patinated wood felt smooth, like a wax floor or tabletop, but with the illusion of being softer. But the illusion was just that. The handwheel, carved from dense hardwood, was harder than most wooden components on the ship. Even with Lorraine's strength, it was impossible to leave a mark with his bare hands. The so-called softness was completely absent. The Andes was the same. Common sense and experience clearly told Lorraine that most of the old 4th-tier conversion ships were merely compromises made by insufficient military spending. These bloated, slow, and even fragile ships had countless flaws and weaknesses. Apart from their superior firepower, their other parameters paled in comparison to those of the 5th-tier ships. Given this, in a single ship duel between the Golden Hind and the Andes, the Golden Hind should have the upper hand. Lorraine should have toyed with a raging bull named Odin like a seasoned matador, until he was exhausted, and then finished him off with spear and rapier. But, it was the golden deer that was more exhausted now, the one being toyed with and forced to run around. Struggling out of his illusion, Lorraine realized the mad bull was standing at attention, waving a red cloth at him. Behind the cloth, a cold light shone. Once the roles change, the difference in power is truly terrifying. Lorraine chuckled, looking up and meeting Henna's eyes. Henna, be my eyes. Yes, it might be a little rocky for a while, but it won't capsize. I trust you, Henna replied seriously. Lorraine breathed a long sigh of relief, a smile on his face, his eyes growing more resolute. Having your trust is wonderful. P.S. In the 18th century, Western surgeons employed brutal methods to identify invisible internal ailments, such as pinching, hitting, hammering, and forcing patients to move the affected area. Many of these techniques have been passed down to the present day. Personally, I suspect their goal was to trick patients into cutting open the wound, making it visible so they could enter their specialized field. Of course, whether the treatment is effective or not, whether the condition will be aggravated or not, etc. are all details and will not be discussed in the identification process. Chapter 212 Fangs and Sharp Teeth. Range 530, starboard side under fire, Roger. Lorraine glanced at the red scarf fluttering beside her, then gently yanked the hand wheel, steering 5 degrees to port. The Golden Hind tilted slightly, suddenly entering the optimal wind angle. A torrential rain was approaching, and the bay wind was strong. The Golden Hind's square sails were completely caught by the wind, and its speed suddenly increased. The bulging sails lifted the bow high, like a seabird flapping its wings, pressing directly against the crest of the waves. Beware of the list. Full starboard rudder, Lorraine shouted at the top of his lungs, his grip on the handwheel clattering to the starboard bottom. The square sails cut a wind, then broke, and by inertia, the ship suddenly headed straight into the wind, swooping towards the Andes bow at a speed exceeding 7 knots. 560, 520, 480, Henna, holding onto the railing, counted the distance, her voice trembling slightly, as the Golden Hind's entire starboard side was exposed to the enemy's guns. 360, 320, boom, boom boom boom. A deafening roar echoed from the distance. Henna shouted a warning, overloaded bombardment, bow hit, opportunity, Lorraine shouted. Lower mainmast sail, full starboard rudder, the sailors were already ready. Upon hearing Lorraine's cry, they untied the mainmast's main line without hesitation. 4 sections of square sails dropped with a crash. The rising main line was pulled by the tremendous force, twisting like a snake on the deck. With a snap, it hit a sailor in the face, spraying blood. The sailor, clutching his face and screaming, flew backwards, only to be caught by the rigging at his waist and slammed to the ground. No one on deck could help him. As the mainsail dropped, the ship's speed plummeted and it instantly tilted to starboard. Lorraine shifted the hand wheel, which had just been straightened, to the starboard side again. Instead of retreating as usual, the Golden Hind closed in again, heading in the direction of the fire. The angle between the two bows was now less than 30 degrees. A hail of artillery fire rained down. The Andes' 24-pounder, mistaking it for a shield, landed far from the Golden Hind's designated area, breaking through the waves and striking empty space. The upper deck's 12-pounder and 9-pounder secondary guns, tracking the ship's shadow, descended like a torrential downpour. With its mainsail removed, the Golden Hind was slow, and in that brief moment, it had just enough time to sprint into the thickest area of secondary fire, its tilted deck bearing down on the hail of bullets. Pierce clutched the watchtower and screamed, multiple hits. Get down. Get out of the way, boom 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 boom. A hail of bullets rained down. A 12-pounder chain shell spun and struck the port bow, severing the guardrail and tumbling into the water. Another 9-pounder, a solid shell, hurtled straight toward the deck, piercing it with a resounding thud, its impact caving in the entire deck. The power of solid bullets lies in their impact and heat. After the impact, light smoke quickly rose from the dry deck lining. However, more close-range impacts sent water sprays pelting the deck, extinguishing the threatening flames. The top of the third inning ended there. Although the Andes had hit a brilliant triple, it still failed to score. Atron took the bat and, amid the roar of the crowd, announced the start of the Golden Hind's strong turn. At this moment, in the center of the gun bay, Atron sat cross-legged directly behind the number 6 gun port, clutching a sketchpad. The sketchpad was covered with a variety of messy, curved lines, numbers dotted along the edges, and traces of erasures were visible everywhere. Almost all of the elite gunners, trained by him personally for over a year and now capable of independent operations, were transferred to his side. Following the custom of the old days, they formed 2 10-man crews, each assigned their own duties, their thoughts focused. What was the battle situation outside? They had no idea. In the nearly enclosed gun bay, they knew only that the Golden Hind's speed had dropped dramatically, and within a short time, it had begun its second full starboard turn. The ship was tilting violently. The dramatic roll, almost capsizing, hadn't stirred any waves in the gun bay. The gunners had been prepared, each one laced with ropes, leaning or sitting, doing whatever it took to maintain their balance. Atron's method was tying himself. He tied himself securely to a pillar, so that even if the Golden Hind flipped over, he could maintain his stability, upside down. It's 320 meters and we're entering the second right cut. The captain's desire is really strong, he muttered. Speed, 2.7, cut angle, the last observation was 28 degrees, wind speed, 7.1, wind direction, the observer hesitated for a moment. There is no wind direction. It's about to rain. There is turbulence in the bay, but it generally maintains a clockwise cyclone, turbulence at 7 knots. It looks like a heavy rain. Yatron made notes on the sketchboard. Gun position number 5 is raised 1 degree, number 6 is 3 degrees to the left, ready to fire. The gunners quickly made adjustments according to the protractor on the gun mount. The gunner held the flint cord in his hand, looked at Yatron, and said in a deep voice, ready to fire. Finally, the inclination, the observer answered quickly, minus 18 degrees, and it continues to shrink. Start counting from the reset, and report every 3 degrees. Yes, Yatron whistled comfortably. You know, gentlemen. As a believer in romance, the thing I hate most in my life is forced sex. This rude behavior is insulated from romance. He patted the sketchpad, covering the number, minus 19, and you don't need to consider the consequences only when the status difference is huge and out of reach. Minus 16, for example, if you fall in love with a queen but are unable to pursue her, forced sex can allow you to have a kiss with her, and then dangle on the gallows with a sweet aftertaste. Minus 13, for example, if you fall in love with someone else's slave and are embarrassed to pursue her, go ahead. Anyway, the amount of compensation is not large, just consider it as taking care of the prostitute's business. Minus 10, bang. Look, our captain got hit back by a lady. It really hurts, but luckily she didn't kick him in the groin. Yatron glanced at the visibly cracked top deck inside. This proves that love can't be won by force. Minus 7, the soul of romance is love. Without love, sex is just the instinct of a beast. Minus 4, gentlemen, don't ever believe that your sexual skills can impress women. They are God's perfect creations, and every one of them is far better than a man. Minus 1, as men, we need gentleness and generosity, but we don't need, positive 2, fire. 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 Yatron raised his voice without warning, his voice hoarse and rapid fire. The gunner instinctively pulled the flint cord. 2 loud booms were heard, smoke filled the air, and red-hot projectiles flew out. More than 2 degrees, less than 5 degrees. No one knew what angle Yatron desired. All they knew was that from the moment the cannon fire sounded, he'd been straining his eyes. Satisfaction, satisfaction, excitement, anticipation. Hit, 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 hit. A bright arc swept across the vast expanse of sea. Gun number 5 plummeted mid-flight, crashing into the water less than 5 meters from the Andes with a thud. Gun number 6 passed through the exploding surface before a splash, then was instantly obscured by the rising water, silent and unnoticed. The spray receded, revealing a dark dent between the Andes' 7th and 8th gun ports. Rough cracks spread like a spiderweb, stopping abruptly at the gun ports without causing any noticeable deformation. Atron's shoulders slumped. Tisk, it's tougher than a turtle's carapace, he complained. Clear the chamber, reload. What are you standing there for, gentlemen? We still have one more chance to fire before we flee. It's better than nothing, but we shouldn't give it up. After reprimanding his gunners, he flipped his hand and untied the rope around his spotter's waist. Sir, could you please run to the handrail and tell our reckless captain? I need more chances. 3, 4, maybe 10. Let's go. In the bottom of the 3rd inning, 1 hit, no runs. Offense and defense switched again. Chapter 213 Ancestor's Blessing. As the observer climbed onto the deck, Lorraine was frantically working the handwheel. And it wasn't just him, everyone on deck was desperately doing what they could, with the most manpower concentrated on the mainmast, completely disregarding the risk of being swept by shrapnel, intent on quickly raising the previously fully lowered square-rigged sail. Simply put, escape was the sole priority. Previously, to create the best possible firing conditions for Atron, the Golden Hind had steered too far inboard, and to avoid the heavy guns, it had voluntarily sacrificed most of its power. Now, To reverse course, the only option was to painstakingly adjust the bow angle from facing to facing away. This meant turning the entire ship at its current slow speed, escaping the unfavorable wind zone and entering the windward area. Then, after a period of sailing to build up enough inertia, it would once again cross the intermediate windless zone and enter the sharp angle that would allow the warship to escape at high speed. The process seemed long even to describe. Lorraine's mind raced with a hand wheel, frantically calculating the time it would take to escape. 3 minutes? Or 5? During this time, Atrain would undoubtedly have more than one opportunity to fire. However, due to the angle of fire, even if the projectiles fired during the turn were to hit, they would hardly be direct hits, much less inflict visible damage on the Andes as before. Conversely, the Andes would have at least one opportunity for a saturation bombardment at a range of 200 to 300 meters. Was it a loss? Lorraine asked herself. The Golden Hind was now completely exposed to the Andes' attack range. Once a saturation bombardment occurred, mere skill would not be enough to protect them from being hit. At this point, the more illusory luck was worth hoping for. Lorraine glanced at the wind-watching headscarf. Henna. Range, 240, 220, turning, slowing down, the headscarf gradually rose, dancing more and more joyfully with the wind. Secondary guns fire, starboard side hit, evade. Lorraine snapped the handwheel to the floor, and at the same moment, the mainsail rose to its zenith, swelling to full height. Parallel, cut to wind, Henna shouted at Lorraine, her voice blending with Pierce's warning. Fire. Evade. As if rehearsed 1,000 times, Lorraine jerked the reversing handwheel. The Golden Hind cut a slight left slant within the wind, her starboard side lifted slightly, and her heavy hull met the incoming missiles. The projectiles plummeted. 12-pound shotgun shells and 9-pound chain shells clattered into the waters around the Golden Hind, huge waves pushing the ship sideways and causing a series of violent jolts. First crisis averted. Lorraine released the handwheel, allowing it to return to its original position. Then, with a light click, he locked the rudder. Henna, keep an eye on the Andes' gun bay. A saturation bombardment isn't far away, Henna nodded solemnly. And you, sir? Lorraine narrowed her eyes at the spotter. I hope you're not here to tell me my gunnery chief is about to abandon his duties. That's nonsense, Captain, the spotter saluted with a thud. Mr. Desix sent me up simply to request more firing opportunities. More opportunities. The Golden Hind returned fire from its starboard side. The number 3 gun port managed a lucky hit, striking the hull near the Andes' bow, sending up a shower of wood chips but posing no threat. As expected. Lorraine shook her head in frustration. I'll keep giving you opportunities. That was the agreement, no. Mr. Desix asked for 5, maybe 10. Saturation bombardment. Lorraine's objection was barely uttered when Henna beside him and Pierce overhead issued simultaneous warnings. Range 270, saturation bombardment, starboard side hit, avoid. The evasion had already begun before the command was even issued. Lorraine released the latch and pushed the handwheel fully left. At the same time, the sailor manning the foresail yards leaped up from the guardrails, leveraging their weight and the ship's turning inertia to push the foresails to follow the wind, maintaining the Golden Deer's only remaining thrust during the brief period of wind loss. Golden Deer, cut left. 24-pound hellbenders descended with a whistling sound. The first 3 landed nearly 50 meters from the Golden Deer's bow, creating a massive splash. The 4th, then the 5th, approaching closer, the rising waves pushing against the Golden Deer's hull, pushing the already heavily tilted ship even further. Then came the 6th, 7th, 8th, over the Golden Deer's head, blasting out over 30 meters. The 9th. Lorraine stared at the projectile's trajectory, his pupils suddenly constricting. Ship, bow strike. The roar lingered in the air as the massive projectile whistled into the center of the bow, colliding squarely with Lorraine's signature alchemical ballista, the narwhal. Crack. 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 Boom. The ship trembled violently as if struck by a heavy blow. The towering foredeck collapsed without a moment's delay. Small pieces of metal flew across the deck like shrapnel, sweeping across the deck, sending 2 sailors flying. Lorraine could smell desperation. Put out the fire, inspect the damage, and tell me as quickly as possible. Quick, he gripped the handwheel and yelled mechanically, but his dazed mind had long since lost focus. He didn't even know the exact impact point of the last 3 shells. He only knew from the ship's feedback that the second one hadn't hit the Golden Hind. That last shot, Did it cause any damage to the hull or keel? If the hull leaked or the structure was damaged, would the Golden Hind, with its speed plummeting, have any chance of escaping the Andes' pursuit? Would it sink in battle? In a matter of moments, the temporary third mate, shrouded in gunpowder, ran to Lorraine. "Captain. It's a miracle." "What?" Lorraine looked bewildered. "It's a miracle. The narwhal ballista intercepted the impact of the shells. Only the bow compartment was damaged. Since all the ammunition was moved to the deck, the fire is small and under control, so, it's alright." Lorraine suddenly recalled Kren's excitement when he first obtained the narwhal back on Hebishi Island. Although he had rarely used this miraculous ancient ballista as his combat level increased, Kren's words and Daniel's subsequent research suggested it was more resilient than existing material processing methods, practically indestructible. "A blessing from our ancestors," Lorraine muttered to himself. Crash. After a long silence, Guanfeng's scarf suddenly fluttered. They had finally broken free of the windbreak and returned to the angle most suitable for escape. Lorraine took a deep breath and adjusted his composure in the blink of an eye. "Sir," he said to the observer. "Return to your post. The second adventure is about to begin." "Yes." The observer quickly ran back, his stumbling back constantly reminding Lorraine of the thrilling scene just now. But for adventurers, only the result is something to savor for a long time. They had miraculously survived the crisis. Lorraine felt the urge to laugh. "Hannah, I have a bad idea." On the Andes, on the main deck, a dignified, tall, middle-aged officer held a telescope, motionless, watching the Golden Hind staggering away. One of the saturation bombardments had hit the target, with the expected penetration point being the bow or port side. However, due to the poor viewing angle, none of the 8 observation points on the ship could confirm the penetration. But the Golden Hind's trajectory had indeed become erratic. Even with full sails, its speed was slower than expected. More importantly, judging from her direction, the mercenary captain on the other side had abandoned the plan to engage the Andes and was instead seeking to break free. This meant, it was badly damaged, right? The middle-aged man was silent for a moment. "Come here." The adjutant stood behind him with a shorthand notebook. "Count, please give the order. Notify the totem that the enemy ship has suffered heavy losses. Pursue the remaining enemy. Pay attention to the movements of the Lucky Horseshoe. They may be trying to break off and survive." "Yes." Chapter 214, Collapse? Escape? Before anyone knew it, the Battle of Lee Robert Bay had raged for a full hour since the first canonship. 3 battleships, 2 regiments, and 9 warships representing Britain and France fought fearlessly on this obscure island chain. Smoke from the gunfire obscured the sky, and resounding roars tore through the dense clouds. A raging fire engulfed the Badger's poop. Shortly before, a chain shell had struck the mid-mainsail, causing the Badger to lose its normal speed. While the ship was dealing with this incident, the opposing Jupiter seized the opportunity and launched 2 solid shells, one from the left and one from the right, into the poop, luckily detonating one of the stern guns. Fortunately, given the limited use of the stern guns in this battle, Nelson had preemptively transferred most of the gunpowder and shells to the main deck, thus limiting the explosion to a small area. Only the officers' quarters were damaged, while the core steering wheel and the critical interior compartments were spared. Now that the fire was under control and the missing topsails had been promptly replaced by the lower sails, the Badger returned to its familiar rhythm, maintaining a slow to medium speed of 2 to 3 knots, carefully hiding in the Jupiter's blind spot, and unleashing its revenge on the enemy who had leaped a level. The battle pattern was largely fixed, and no further detailed command was needed in the short term. British warships had a well-established hierarchy of command, leaving little room for the captain to demonstrate his abilities before the final boarding battle. Nelson stood majestically on the relatively empty forecastle deck, his gaze not lingering over the Jupiter, which had suffered no decisive damage despite the numerous fireworks. Instead, he scanned the calm sea to the south, intentionally or unintentionally. The enemy at the end of the sea was also an ally. The battle there was more arduous than here. Lorraine faced the cunning Gave-Auden, and the Golden Hind grappled with the large and unwieldy Andes. How would the outcome be? Should a launch be sent to observe the situation? Nelson stroked his chin, lost in thought. Dozens of kilometers away, at the true heart of the Battle of Lee Robert Bay, the side of the Golden Hind stumbling out in a cloud of smoke caught the eyes not only of the French admiral, the Count of Gave-Auden, but also of Collingwood and the entire crew of the Wasp. During the hour-long artillery battle, these elite British sailors felt virtually no pressure. The Wasp lay carelessly horizontally just outside the exit of Channel 5, sails lowered, boats disembarked, decks clear, and sheer concentration. Yet, despite this outward display of concentration, the actual bombardment remained perfunctory. The target was there, it wouldn't flee, hide, advance, or retreat. So far, the Wasp's closest impact had been 150 meters, and their own attacks were similar, with no shells ever landing within 100 meters of the target. This battle. The Wasp's crew wasn't particularly concerned with the Golden Hind's real-time status. But caught in the purgatory of a life-or-death battlefield, they seemed to have little more meaningful to do than cheer their comrades on. But now, their comrades who came to support them have run away. The sailors of the Wasp looked at each other awkwardly. The lieutenant captain, who had a close personal relationship with Collingwood, was elected by the sailors to come in front of their captain and ask the question that everyone was most concerned about. "Major, the Golden Hind seems to be badly damaged, I can see it." Collingwood looked at the distance expressionlessly. "Heading to the 4th channel, the speed is 3 to 4 knots. From the perspective of a fleeing ship, her sails are not fully exposed to the wind, and there are more unnecessary movements during navigation, which greatly affects her efficiency in escaping the battle. Probably, the previous shot caused heavy losses. For example, the main sailors were killed and the ship was leaderless." Collingwood sneered and pointed at the Golden Hind. "It may not be visible from the Andes' perspective, but from our perspective, the scene of the bullet just now is clear. There was no one on the bow deck at all. As for the scattered debris, how much threat do you think it can pose to a strong man who climbs a cliff with his bare hands?" The captain was stunned. "Major means President Drake is faking defeat." "I don't know." Collingwood shook his head regretfully. "Drake and the Admiral are of the same kind, decisive, resolute, knowledgeable, and highly accomplished. They were once mentioned in the same breath by the Naval Academy, but the Admiral chose to devote himself to his country, while Drake chose to remain independent." "Major, I don't understand." "It doesn't matter if you don't understand. Even I don't know what you're trying to say. Pass it on. Stay calm. At least until defeat is certain, we all have an absolute obligation to remain at our posts." "Yes," the captain was coaxed back, and now, with no one else around, Collingwood's face darkened. Lorraine Arthur Drake, at such a young age, had amassed a vast estate. With his abilities and family background, he could have made a name for himself in the Royal Navy, defending his country. But he chose to retire, too eager to even wait until he graduated from the Naval Academy. Whatever the hidden secrets, he was a countryless man. A man without a country cannot be relied upon. He may be brave, fearless, passionate, and skilled in battle, but if he determines that victory is hopeless, how determined will he be to fight to the death? None, right? The direct attack just now might not have destroyed the Golden Hind, but it might have shattered his inner will to win. Feigning defeat. Was the purpose of feigning defeat to deceive the French, or the British? Lorraine Drake, would he really desert a battlefield? Collingwood couldn't guess the answer. In his opinion, perhaps only a brilliant commander like Nelson among the younger generation could understand Lorraine's intentions. But he couldn't contact Nelson right now. On the vast battlefield, he was incredibly far away from Nelson, yet incredibly close to the Andes. Wasp, should he advance now? Or retreat? Drawing a scattered trajectory, the Golden Hind drifted, sleepwalking towards the battlefield's only exit, the 4th channel. This kind of thing seemed incredibly simple to describe. However, ships aren't living things, and it's difficult to truly convey the daze and fear of a defeated general through human eyes. Furthermore, the Golden Hind lacks any reference points, leaving no room for such negativity and despair. Waiting for battle, wanting to fight, begging for battle. After experiencing the divinely blessed bow strike, that was the true atmosphere aboard the Golden Hind. The so-called escape was merely a new tactic of Lorraine to lure the enemy based on the current situation. To achieve a most realistic effect, Lorraine assigned a sailor with no steering experience to take the helm. He also ordered the 3 sails to operate independently, eliminating unified command. This ultimately shattered any sense of coordination, and the Golden Hind swayed and widened the distance from the Andes. The uneven wind and erratic course, coupled with the thick, column-like billowing black smoke from the bow, created a scene of panic, like a lost dog. With a moment's free time, Lorraine and Hannah went to Noah's divination room. Opposite Carmen's staff room, these 2 cabins were located at the left and right angles of the upper deck of the stern cabin, offering the best view. Unless you were standing on the balcony, They were also very concealed. Hina casually drew a card from Noya's deck and, without saying what she had drawn, simply put it back in the deck. Pretending to be injured to attract the target's guards to chase after you is also a common tactic in assassinations, she said softly with her eyelids lowered, but when assassins use this tactic, they are often the only worthy targets to be killed, which is different from the current situation. Different? Lorraine tilted her head. Are you worried that I will be self-defeating, and once the distance is too great, Gavin will immediately abandon me and seek victory from the Wasp? This is the most effective way to achieve victory. In principle, you are right. But I guarantee that Gavin will not dare to let us enter the fourth channel. Why, Lee Robert? Lorraine laughed. Compared to the Wasp and the Badger, the Golden Deer that destroyed Lee Robert is the most evil criminal here. The Golden Deer was slippery before, and it was difficult for him to get a chance. Now we behave like this. If we are allowed to escape again, Gavin will not be able to explain to the governor and parliament of Martinique, so the French brig will definitely come to chase us, the Andes, or that brig to punish the culprit who hurt the French people. He must hunt me down, and to win the Battle of Lee Robert Bay, he must suppress the Wasp. The two ships will definitely separate, and as long as they separate, we will have an opportunity. Pinch the brig. Pinching it is probably impossible. Lorraine sighed regretfully. This plan is temporary, and we have no means to notify our comrades. If we don't want the Wasp to do anything unnecessary due to misjudgment, we have to act separately. If we also separate, Henna's eyes lit up. You plan to let Belgidia contain the Andes? Before she finished speaking, Lorraine also locked onto the figure of the French brig totem speeding from behind through the telescope. What a beautiful new ship. I really don't want to let it go, he murmured and stood up. Henna, let Bell attack. Tell him I need an hour. Chapter 215 Genius Bosun. Wasp, danger is imminent. A commotion erupted on the deck. Collingwood, pale-faced, stared at the Andes, bearing down like a thundercloud in the distance, his lips pursed in silence. He still hadn't made a final decision on whether to advance or retreat. That wasn't to say the Wasp had no chance of escaping the Andes. After all, the two sides were 3 kilometers apart, and the fog had lifted. Given the Andes' clumsiness, the Wasp had every chance of escaping via Channel 4 if it chose. But what was the cost? If he abandoned his defensive position, the entire front at the entrance of Channels 4 and 5 would collapse, leading to the utter failure of the Battle of Lee Robert Gulf and even the entire Halloween operation. Nelson would be trapped within the enemy lines, with no way to retreat or escape. Whether he sank in battle or was captured would be essentially the same. Collingwood asked himself, could he afford such a price? Publicly speaking, with his commander dead and the battle disastrously lost, he, as the lieutenant general, must bear full responsibility. Ordering him to retire was the most lenient punishment imaginable. Personally, Nelson was his dearest friend. So, hold the line until the ship sinks? Hoist the hope that Lorraine Drake will devise a more ingenious plan, turning the tide during the escape? If the Wasp sinks, what's the point of holding on? Collingwood listened intently, the panic on deck overwhelming him. Raise the sails. Raise the sails immediately, discard all useless debris, and unhook the launch. We're not in an offensive mode now, dragging the launch behind will only slow us down. Warning, warning. The Andes has turned and is heading towards us, at 2 knots, increasing continuously. Expected engagement within half an hour. Target in Channel 5 has also begun advancing. Increase the intensity of the bombardment and push back. We can't let them attack from both sides. Oh my God. Are we going to stay here and die? Mother, save me. Despair filled the air. Collingwood stood on the midst of despair, coldly watching the sails rise ever higher. He neither stopped the sailors' spontaneous actions nor ordered the anchor raised, freeing the Wasp's final shackles. He felt he should say something. Humiliation or despair. As a commander, it was his duty to show his crew the way forward. But he didn't know what to say. Standing before these men who had followed him to battle, should he solemnly sentence himself to death, or incite them to fight to the bitter end, denying them a chance at life? Lorraine Drake had finally escaped. The first mate, known for his efficiency, strode forward. Lieutenant, the Andes has begun to advance, and the enemy in its path has apparently received orders as well. If we remain here, will we be caught in a pincer attack? Collingwood interrupted. Yes, Captain, you used to work in the Admiralty. The gentleman who recommended you to board the ship repeatedly mentioned that you are capable and intelligent. I trust your judgment, Collingwood's voice still did not reveal any emotion. "In your opinion, what should we do in the current situation?" Mobile attack. The first mate chose his words. "Major, if a two-pronged attack is formed, the Wasp will not be able to hold the front line at all, but if we can adjust to the mobile offensive posture in time, with our mobility. Use mobile attacks to tie down a fourth-level ship and two or more ships of the same level in a relatively vast sea area, waiting for Drake to adjust and return, or for the Admiral to defeat the opponent and return to support the battlefield." "Right, yes, you really have the talent of a staff officer." Collingwood laughed meaningfully, and laughed a few times before realizing that his emotions were out of control. He quickly waved his hand to apologize. "I'm sorry, I mean no harm. I really think a mobile attack is an excellent judgment." The first mate smiled bitterly. "But you don't plan to adopt it, right? Staff officers are always just staff officers. We will not be responsible for the decisions, so we cannot bear the right to make the final decision, but at least, you let me successfully see your talent." Collingwood stretched out his fingers and stretched lazily as if he had let go. "Captain, how far has Channel 5 advanced? Because we increased the density of bombing, the distance is now 630, and it has basically stopped moving forward, whereas the Andes, the speed has finally stabilized at 2.5 knots, and the estimated time for the start of the war has been revised to 1 hour later. It seems that the Earl on the opposite side is ready to drive us away in a dignified manner, and the priority is to achieve the merger of the two routes, as steady as ever, not taking any risks." Collingwood paused. "Golden Deer. Has there been any change in Drake?" "It has officially jumped out of sight. The lookout feedback shows that it is 7,200 meters away from us and 3,700 meters away from the fourth channel. The Fa totem has caught up, and because it is sailing at full speed, it is only a matter of time before the Golden Deer is caught up before entering the fourth channel." Collingwood felt a little bit of incongruity and couldn't help frowning. Will the Golden Hind be caught up? If Drake truly wishes to flee, he at least has the Lucky Horseshoe ready to fight. Where is the Lucky Horseshoe? The Lucky Horseshoe? The first mate was visibly stunned. Since the beginning of the war, the Lucky Horseshoe has been hidden as a reserve force outside the battle area, rarely entering the battlefield. Observing her is difficult and of little value, so, found her, Collingwood shouted, receiving a thrilling report from the lookout. A ship's shadow has been spotted directly behind the Andes. Observing its characteristics, it's our Lucky Horseshoe. She's pursuing the Andes. Extremely fast. My goodness, the wing sails. The Lucky Horseshoe has unfurled its wing sails, making 12 knots, compared to the Andes' 9.5. This is a charge. Our Lucky Horseshoe is charging. Hooray! Across the azure sea, a fleeting silhouette pierced the wind and waves, speeding towards us like lightning. That was the Lucky Horseshoe, owned by the Drake Merchants Guild and temporarily affiliated with the General Chamber of Commerce. In the late 18th century, before the concept of clippers matured, 12 knots, or nearly 20 kilometers per hour, was considered ultra-fast for a sailing warship, putting it in the top tier. Especially for a warship not known for its speed, achieving such speeds required a combination of favorable timing, location, and personnel. The top-tier first and third-tier ships generally had a maximum speed of 9-10 knots. Second and fourth-tier ships, with their bloated hulls and unstable centers of gravity, rarely reached 9 knots. Smaller ships, fifth and sixth-tier ships, were generally faster, often boasting design speeds exceeding 10 knots, approaching 11. However, the only ship type capable of reaching 12 knots and adopted by the major powers was the Baltimore brig, which incorporated the high-speed genes of the New World, boasting a distinctive slender bow and full-width wing sails. The Lucky Horseshoe was a unique Baltimore brig, commanded by Belgiodia, one of England's foremost sailors of the new generation. The Gulf winds before a storm were cyclonic, with narrow, chaotic clockwise winds. Maintaining peak speed in such conditions demanded a triple test of a sailor's skill, inspiration, and talent. For example, Lorraine, a fellow sailor and Bell's peer, held a similar acclaim in the Naval Academy. His years in business had amassed a wealth of practical experience, having navigated and witnessed a wide variety of extreme water conditions. However, the Golden Hind, under his command, could only maintain 50–70% of its speed in maneuvering mode, and even found herself repeatedly stuck waiting for the wind during extreme turns, nearly sinking at sea. Under the same conditions, Bell effortlessly capitalized on the high-speed cuts of the wingsail, closing in on the Andes' course through continuous narrow turns, rather than swiftly ruddering. The sound and momentum of his movement were like thunder. The sailor who temporarily took on the role of first mate moved closer to Bell with a pale face and shouted at the top of his voice. "Captain! The Wasp has lowered its sails. The Wasp has lowered its sails." Bell licked his lips and said jokingly, "It seems that our distinguished comrade is finally not planning to run away. We won the first battle and lived up to the President's expectations. Gentlemen, in the competition for long-term contracts, each of you has added 1 point, hooray! Next, it's an hour of tightrope dancing. Do you want to win those 100 long-term contracts? Yes. Yes. Yes, then take it from the stupid bear over there. Lucky Horseshoe, go ahead." Chapter 216, Castling. Count gave Auden drew a bright red line on the chart. This was the first red line in the final simulation of the Battle of Lee Robert Gulf, indicating the Andes' trajectory. Starting from its current position, it would advance in a straight line, intimidating the strategic exit of the 5th Channel. With the Andes' movements, the Wasp would inevitably become dynamic, most likely abandoning the battle and seeking an escape through the 4th Channel. This would allow the Pioneer and Fortress, stranded within the channel, to easily enter the bay and rendezvous with the Andes. 3 zigzag-colored lines represented the battle situation in the 5th Channel area. Then came the crucial 4th Channel. The severely damaged Golden Hind had fled to the 4th Channel first, and the totem had been dispatched to intercept it. The British would undoubtedly assume the totem's goal was to sink the Golden Hind, but in reality, Count gave Auden deftly turned the straight line into a zigzag. The totem would surge at high speed, overtaking the enemy and entering the 4th Channel first. While the brig class's firepower was weak, it could still hold its own within the channel at the right distance. Furthermore, unless the battle was decisive, the Golden Hind's companion ship, the Lucky Horseshoe, which hadn't yet been deployed, would be unable to execute a tail-cutting tactic. This would block the 4th Channel, trapping the Golden Hind, Wasp, and Lucky Horseshoe within the bay and forcing a second decisive battle against the new French battleship group, the 5th Channel group centered around the Andes. The comparison of strength between the two sides. On the French side was the intact 4th-tier ship Andes, along with the equally intact Pioneer and Fortress. On the British side was the severely damaged Golden Hind, accompanied by the Wasp and Lucky Horseshoe. A decisive battle was a sure thing. Coulter gave Auden effortlessly drew a huge cross outside the 4th Channel, smiled, dropped his quill, and looked up to find his lieutenant. "What's the situation with the Wasp? The target distance is 2,700, the sails are being set, and the anchor has not been weighed yet. Is there still any chance?" The Count shook his head. "What about the Pioneer's response to the order?" The 5th Channel reply: "The density of artillery fire in the channel has increased, and there is a risk of being hit by bullets if you continue to move forward. Please give more time. The distance between the two sides, the distance is 630, and movement is difficult. The annoying British speed." The Count stroked his beard in disdain. "This is a practical difficulty. In the narrow sea area, the British artillery fire is indeed flawless. Request for permission, order them to put sufficient pressure on the target and force them to abandon their battle positions." "Yes, Admiral." "And that reckless mercenary destroyer, where did it escape to?" "The distance is 5,200, the speed is 2, the totem's pursuit is very effective, and the relative distance has been reduced to 1,100. It will definitely be able to occupy the channel before the target." "Wasn't the captured Lucky Horseshoe blocked?" "The Lucky Horseshoe is still moving on the outer line, with no signs of joining the battle." Count gave Auden was stunned. "You said there were no signs of participation." "Yes, what do the staff think?" "The staff suggested that the Lucky Horseshoe's flag belonged to the hired merchant guild, and they'd likely refuse to carry out the tail-cutting mission." "Refuse to carry out the mission?" The Count stroked his beard, lost in thought. Halfway through his thought, the deputy chief of the fleet staff ran over, saluted, and without further ado, thrust a new update into his aide's arms. The aide took one look, his face drastically changing. "What? Bad news?" the Count asked curiously. "Admiral. Lucky Horseshoe enters the battle. Speed 12 knots, target Andes." "What?" Across the vast ocean, the Lucky Horseshoe raced along, riding the wind. Due to the differences in topography, naval warfare differs significantly from land warfare. For example, strategic locations suitable for concealing troops are rare on the sea, and the key lines of battle are limited to a few, such as deck visibility, lookout visibility, and navigation limits. Furthermore, sailing ships were slow to maneuver, unable to maneuver as swiftly as land forces. The relentless sea breezes and waves limited the reach of ships' firepower. Regardless of the effective range of their guns, their actual combat range was limited to 500 meters. These limitations altered the concept of ambush in naval warfare. Ambush at sea was primarily based on concealing tactical intent, creating or exploiting conditions that could mislead the enemy, leading them to miscalculate the entire battle situation and deploy ships in their favor. Therefore, once the Lucky Horseshoe's target was revealed, the fog of war vanished, and Lorraine essentially laid his tactical intent bare for all to see. It was the same Kingroch castling that Attring had advised against. In the previous stalemate, due to the strategic exchange between the Lucky Horseshoe and the French totem, Lorraine had been forced to use the Golden Hind to single-handedly engage the Andes, unable to find a chance to reverse the disadvantage on the battlefield. Until that miraculous, seemingly imperfect shot, the alchemical ballista Narwhal, with its resilient frame, withstood a direct hit from a 24-pounder. Despite the devastating appearance, the Golden Hind suffered virtually no damage that would impair its combat effectiveness. Lorraine's opportunity finally arrived. The Golden Hind retreated, pursued by the totem, and the Andes set out to suppress the Wasp. The idle Lucky Horseshoe suddenly emerged, replacing the Golden Hind as the Andes' opponent. The strategic stalemate was thus broken. The Lucky Horseshoe's entry into the battlefield was perfectly timed. On the one hand, the Wasp was no weakling. Even if the Andes continued its plan to forcefully open the fifth passage, Collingwood would be able to hold out until he joined Bell, creating a 2-on-1 blockade. Even if he failed to inflict a decisive blow on the Andes, the fifth passage would remain blocked. On the other hand, even if the Andes abandoned its plan to open the fifth passage and opted for the seemingly safer course of action, linking up with the totem, the distance between the four ships would have prevented the restoration of coordination. Even within striking distance, a new battleground would have emerged, the Golden Deer versus the totem, the Andes versus the Lucky Horseshoe. Like Zheng in a horse race with his friend, he lost when his inferior horse faced a superior one. Then, he won when his superior horse faced a good one, and vice versa. While the real battlefield wasn't so idealistic, Lorraine had somehow shifted the concept, shifting the victory criteria from the decisive victory between the Golden Deer and the Andes to the swift defeat of the totem and the Lucky Horseshoe. The side that first eliminated the immediate enemy would gain the privilege of 2 against 1. Lorraine took over the steering wheel again. Come on, let's see whether you sink Bell first, or I disable your henchman first. Full starboard. Seize the T-head, the Golden Hind, hesitant for a moment, suddenly regained its composure at the command 800 meters from the totem. It abruptly changed course, cutting in a sharp arc between the totem and the entrance to the fourth channel. Full chain shells, target 470 meters ahead, open fire. Meanwhile, Bell Judia. During the pursuit, Bell desperately hoped the Andes would choose a direction and initiate a maneuvering artillery engagement. While this might seem like a threat to Lorraine's plan, in reality, the Andes would be more vulnerable while in motion. The accuracy of the bombardment would drop significantly, and the extended sails would increase the surface area exposed to the shells. Furthermore, the ship's unwieldy hull wouldn't significantly improve its ability to evade attacks. However, everything Bell could envision, the renowned and conservative Gavaudin had already considered. The Andes halted without hesitation, abandoning all support, lowered sails and erected its guns, awaiting the Lucky Horseshoe's arrival with a powerful, static bombardment. Tisk, you're still the undisputed superior by sinking me first? Then try it, old man. Target distance 920, relative velocity 7.5, engage. Bell detected a turbulent current flowing from north to south and jerked the wheel sharply to starboard, sending the Lucky Horseshoe surging through the waves and cutting across the Andes bow. Saturation bombardment, over 20 projectiles blasted from the Andes broadside, over 600 meters away. Bell ignored them, pressing the wheel firmly to close. The Lucky Horseshoe's speed barely decreased. In the brief moment between the launch of the bombardment and the impact of the shells, she fiercely cut across, leaving all the shells behind her. 460, 400, 340, 280. Saturation bombardment. Everyone expected Bell to turn, but he remained motionless. The turbulent current still maintained a north-south wind direction. Turning at this point would have stalled the Lucky Horseshoe, and the 280-meter range was no match for a brigade-type gunfire. Charge! A barrage of shells rained down around the Lucky Horseshoe, sending huge waves crashing against the rudder, sending feedback into Bell's palm, causing the handwheel to tremble. 220, 180, 140, Bell clenched his fist and turned the handwheel, rudder 10 degrees to port, parallel. Fire! With a roar, the Lucky Horseshoe banked nearly 10 degrees to port, the starboard guns opening in succession. The rumble of cannons announced the attack at close range. Attack, escape. The warship, seizing the moment the turbulence ended, maintained a speed exceeding 5 knots, its soaring projectiles showering the sea like a scattering of flowers. Effective deterrence, the observer shouted excitedly. 3 shells jumped over the target and hit the back sea at distances of 50, 70, and 220. It's an effective deterrent. Effective deterrence means that the Andes can feel threatened. In the previous round of shelling, 3 shells fell behind the opponent, which means that as long as the Lucky Horseshoe is lucky enough, it can throw chain shells or buckshot onto the deck and cause real damage to the Andes. Bell breathed a sigh of relief, stuck the handwheel, and shook his stiff arms vigorously. Cut the wingsail and fire the stern gun. It's time to run for your lives, brave gentlemen. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 217 Heavy Rain. Cut the port side, take cover on deck, upper chain shells, lower live ammunition, ready, fire, boom boom boom. A continuous barrage of artillery fire, a thick cloud of gunpowder. Having successfully decoyed the enemy, and in this advantageous encounter, Lorraine abandoned his cautious style against the Andes and became aggressive, bold, and extremely bold in the duel with the totem. Disregarding damage and ammunition, after the initial head-on collision, the Golden Deer completely crushed the totem, even forcing a dangerous range of around 30 meters, using the most daring close-range bombardment to shorten the time needed to defeat the enemy. Close-range bombardment meant a significantly higher hit rate for both sides. The 2 ships crossed parallel to each other, 26 meters apart, port to port, their guns fully opened. 18-pound, 12-pound, 9-pound, and other types of guns blazed in succession, and at this near-zero distance, over 80% of the rounds hit the target. Such a gunfight was undoubtedly frenzied. Though diminutive, the brig was a legitimate warship. Its lower 12-pounder guns were more than capable of damaging the Golden Hind's hull. The upper 9-pounder guns were relatively ineffective, but repeated direct hits would still send wood ships flying and rupture the hull. Of course, Lorraine would not trade at a loss. Using the same tactics, but with even greater attack and defense, the Golden Hind's 18-pounder main guns ripped holes in the enemy's hull. The upper 12-pounder guns, even more powerful, loomed above, wreaking havoc on the totem's decks. Fortunately, Lorraine's target wasn't the sailors, but the masts, the sails, the rigging and knots that wove in the ship like a spider web. These were the muscles and nerves of a sailing ship. If they were destroyed, even the most powerful warship would be crippled. This was the inspiration that the T-head strike had given Lorraine. Looking back to a moment earlier, when Lorraine had seized the T-head, Atrin had, for the first time, ordered all the guns to reload chain shells. Such an order was unusual. Due to the design of the shells, chain shells were far inferior to traditional solid projectiles in range and stability, and the difference was so significant that their accuracy was appalling. But this round of bombardment, at approximately 140 meters, was truly eye-opening. From their commanding height, the swirling chains swept across the totem's deck like a flock of seabirds, scoring 3 hits. 2 of them merely grazed the mainsail, tearing 2 massive gashes in the totem's second cross sail. The third, the most fortunate, entangled itself directly in the totem's evasive foremast, its inertia driving it straight through, severing this vital, horn-like power mast. The bowsail shattered, the rigging slackened. With just this one strike, the totem's power plummeted by 30%, leaving it unable to escape the Golden Hind's relentless pursuit. Victory or defeat was a matter of time. Another round of broadsides ended, and the 2 ships turned back, like knights. Lorraine delicately turned the handwheel, looking at the shattered port railing and letting out a soft breath. Reporting the damage, 8 shells hit the port side, 2 gun ports deformed, causing the gun mounts to collapse. The gun bays are intensively repairing the damage, What about the target? A hole was penetrated in the gun deck, but no secondary explosion occurred. We also clearly observed a chain shell directly hitting the mizzenmast. What a pity. If it had been fired a second earlier, it might have severed the mizzenmast. What ifs? Lorraine chuckled nonchalantly. Push the useless guns into the sea and prepare for the fourth broadside. Prepare for battle, still on the port side, yes. 5 kilometers away, the Lucky Horseshoe was tackling the Andes as it had at the beginning. Not for victory, not for fighting, but for shamelessness and humiliation. Bell's range of action was from 200 to 600 meters, centered on the drifting Andes. Judging from this result, his tactics seemed to be identical to Lorraine's. However, the Count of Gévaudan and his crew, who engaged Lorraine and Bell in repeated battles, could clearly sense that despite superficial similarities, their maneuvers were nothing alike. Lorraine's advances and retreats were clearly aggressive, each advance driven by an opportunity, each retreat driven by a lost opportunity. This ensured that Lorraine's actions were predictable and calculated, even allowing for deliberate exploitation to lure the Golden Hind into a dangerous position. Bell's actions, however, were unpredictable. Whether motivated by self-preservation or sheer temperament, the Lucky Horseshoe's advances and retreats were guided solely by the wind. Turbulence was Bell's sole compass. He advanced when the wind was turbulent and retreated when it was calm, without any plan or emotion. The Andes's crew still remembered the most thrilling moment of the encounter, when Bell cut directly into the Andes's stern, 120 meters below, evading 3 rounds of intense bombardment without sacrificing speed, effectively wresting the T-head advantage from Gévaudan. At this distance and position, even a ship as short-sighted as a brig, with a reasonable angle, had a significant chance of its upper deck secondary guns hurling shrapnel into the Andes's crew. The sailors aft were already praying, but the Lucky Horseshoe slipped away without a sound. That was Bell's best chance to inflict direct damage on the Count of Gévaudan, but even Bell himself hadn't anticipated that the attack, not only close but also fully deployed its broadside. The ship's gun ports had already expended their ammunition before they could deploy, and even if the opportunity had been rare, there was no immediate prospect of another round. This was perhaps a different kind of stalemate. From then on, the Count of Gévaudan became even more cautious, demonstrating his masterful command skills to the fullest, never losing his T-advantage again. The veteran's sophistication caused Bell great suffering, while Bell's talent also intimidated the Count. He had never remembered such a gifted helmsman. The sails, rudder, and the raging winds of heaven and earth merged into one, thanks to her tiny handwheel. The Lucky Horseshoe became a spirit of the wind, and no matter how many times the ship changed direction, its speed never dropped below 5 knots. This was an almost impossible myth. The Count's heart was involuntarily agitated. From the moment Lorraine's trap was revealed, everyone on the battlefield knew that time was of the essence. The strategic exchange between the two brigs had been broken. The once insignificant frigates suddenly became the protagonists. Whoever was sunk first would lose the initiative in the battle. In this situation, the Count of Gévaudan realized with sorrow that he was completely helpless against Bell's ruthless sword. The wind carried a growing dampness. The Count stretched out his hand, feeling the rare coolness of a Caribbean summer. Was the rainstorm that had been brewing all night finally coming? Who would have the last laugh in the storm? And that damned Lucky Horseshoe is charging in again. How long will the turbulence last this time? He chuckled self-deprecatingly, raised his hand and clenched his command sword, his expression devoid of any joy. Steady and steady, don't panic. Gentlemen, generously offer our broadsides and welcome our guests with the most gracious artillery fire. Stand by, Monsieur Count. Enemy ship sighted due north. Range 2,300, speed 5.5, bow marking, it's that escaping antler destroyer, how could it be, so fast? The command sword clattered to the deck. The Count stared blankly at the increasingly clear silhouette of the Golden Hind, despair welling in his eyes. Prepare for boarding, muskets, boom. Thunder roared. Bean-sized raindrops poured down from the sky, without any emotion building up, transforming into a torrential downpour in the blink of an eye. Count Gévaudan stood like a puppet in the sudden downpour, his ears filled with the sound of thunder, rain, and the panicked commands of his officers. Drop your muskets. Line up on deck. Prepare. Prepare. The enemy ships are coming up. Chapter 218 Scepter. Do those remnants of history born from eternity, called gods or demons, truly exist? If so, do they possess true power? If so, where do they reside? If so, Why don't they respond to the pleas of their followers? A sudden downpour arrived, just as the Golden Hind returned to the fray, preparing to double-team the Andes. It was the first time in nearly 3 hours since the battle began that the British had truly gained the upper hand. While this meant a shift in attack and defense, it didn't guarantee victory. The Andes was nearly intact, and forcing a forcible engagement on a Class IV ship armed with 24-pound guns was inherently risky. Lorraine, Bell, and Collingwood, who stood by applauding, knew that the life-or-death duel had truly begun at that moment. And then, the storm began. Torrential rain obscured a defender's vision, fierce winds shattered the attack's route, and monstrous waves robbed the gunners of their vital firing position. The pervasive moisture destroyed the French's most valuable equipment, rendering their muskets useless in such weather. The Andes desperately fought the storm. 20 minutes later, the Golden Hind rammed her starboard side. Lorraine and Henna, leading 200 howling pirates, leaped aboard and launched a swift assault on the French from the swaying floating islands. 10 minutes later, the Lucky Horseshoe joined the fray, ramming head-on into the Golden Hind's starboard side. Over 100 eager sailors, using their flagship as a staging post, charged into the fray, swords in hand. Victory was now certain. The Atlantic Defense Fleet, subordinate to the French New World Fleet, was at best a third-rate regional fleet. Apart from the experienced Count Gavaudan, its officers and sailors, their tactics, and their fighting spirit were not particularly commendable. In contrast, Lorraine's privateers were no less skilled than pirates. Compared to formal artillery engagements, boarding and plundering were their true calling and specialty. Furthermore, the Golden Hind boasted Lorraine, Henna, and Noah, 3 exceptional individuals whose individual combat prowess far surpassed that of ordinary men. The more disorganized the defense organization and the more complex the combat environment, the more fully the individual's combat capabilities could be demonstrated. The boarding battle was nothing short of unstoppable. In less than half an hour, Lorraine and Henna, facing each other from behind, under the cover of the Silver Tarot, broke through numerous obstacles and kicked open the door to the Andes's command room. Freshly washed and dressed in a brand new uniform, his chest adorned with medals, Count Gavaudan sat with his eyes closed behind the square table in the command room. On the table lay his admiral's baton, his command sword, an old dragoon pistol, and 6 frayed logbooks. His face showed no fear. "Young man, are you the captain of the assault team on that merchant ship? Or the commander?" Lorraine smiled, sheathed his sword, and saluted with his hand on his chest. "My lord, Lorraine Arthur Drake, president of the Drake Chamber of Commerce, sends his greetings." Drake Chamber of Commerce. The Count frowned slightly, as if searching his memory. "Your name doesn't seem to be mentioned in the English Chamber of Commerce in the New World, which boasts a fleet of destroyers." "Really?" Lorraine was even more surprised than the Count of Gavaudan. However, he didn't rush to reintroduce himself. Instead, he strode into the room, stepping on bloody footprints, and made his way straight to the bar. "What would you like to drink?" "Of course, that bottle of brandy from my collection. Remember to add ice. By the way, the ice is in the cabinet down there. There's a beautiful ice box, an oriental artifact my daughter gave me." Lorraine opened the cabinet as instructed and immediately saw the quaint bronze box. "It's actually an ice box from the Qin and Han dynasties," the Count shrugged regretfully. "Collectors say it's a contemporary imitation and my daughter was deceived. But to me, it's still priceless. To you, it is." Lorraine brought out the ice box, took out a few ice cubes, poured wine, and pushed the wine glass and ice box toward the Count. "If you don't mind the trouble, I will give up my ownership of it." "Thank you very much." The atmosphere between the two sides eased significantly. The Count picked up the ice box and placed it at his feet. He looked up and smiled at Lorraine, who had taken the seat opposite him. "Why would I never have heard of you? It surprises you, Drake, Mr. Drake." Lorraine took a sip of the wine, feeling the mellow aroma of the wine evaporate on his taste buds, and breathed a sigh of relief. "From the perspective of a junior, I suggest that the first thing you do after returning to your country's admiralty is to complain about the New World Intelligence Department's negligence, shifting the blame, although this is one aspect," Lorraine said bluntly. "On the other hand, my branch has been listed in Kingston for several months, and Martinique is included in the trade licenses it has obtained. The fact that you have never heard of me is enough to prove that it is not a false accusation. It seems I have to thank you again." Count Gavaudan smiled bitterly. "Let's get back to the topic. Mr. Drake, please tell me if the damage on the ship is heavy. Although the rain outside has lessened a little, It is not enough to count the results of the battle, and as far as I know, the resistance on the ship is still not over, and your soldiers are very brave, but they can't stop you from capturing their fleet commander. That's two different things. Your adjutant had his sword and pistol knocked away by me, but he still tried to stop me from moving forward with his bare hands. Bravery does not mean success, and failure does not mean cowardice. Mr. Opie, the Count's face was even more bitter. Did he die in battle? I knocked out his front teeth with the handle of my knife, and he might have hit his head and got a bump. Lorraine playfully made a gesture of knocking on the door, but since his head can be embedded in the partition wall, generally speaking, his life is safe. You are a strange businessman. The Count had extremely complicated feelings. I have never heard of a president who is as good at fighting as you. Not only is he excellent in naval battles, but also in hand-to-hand combat. As he was speaking, a sailor covered in blood ran in from the door controlled by Hannah and Noah, apologized, and whispered in Lorraine's ear. After the sailor finished speaking, Lorraine crossed his fingers and looked directly at the Count. My lord, he said, the latest news is that my sailors recently breached the last cabin on the forecastle. The Andes' resistance is over. Is that so? Count gave out and showed no regret. He simply gently pushed the jeweled scepter toward Lorraine. I now declare my surrender, Mr. Drake. He stood up, bent down to pick up the ice box at his feet, and adjusted the medals on his chest. Where is my cell? Lorraine reached out and picked up the scepter. Hannah, send 2 people to arrange a clean single room for the Count. No need for a body search. Do not violate the dignity of a soldier. 3 hours later, the clouds dissipated, and the sea calmed. Post-battle cleanup work was proceeding smoothly on the 3 connected ships. Lorraine was not in a hurry. Because the ships were boarding together in a storm, the cables had become tangled. Even if he were anxious, it would be difficult to set off to support other battlefields in a short time. This marked the end of his battle at Reborn. In this clash, the Golden Deer and the Lucky Horseshoe, both of the Drake Company, faced off against the Andes and the Totem in a 2-on-2 duel, with a crew ratio of 460 to 530 and a firepower ratio of 72 to 84. The battle began in the early morning and lasted for 3 hours, culminating in a boarding encounter amidst a storm. Ultimately, Lorraine secured an undeniable victory. On the defense fleet side, the Andes was captured, and the Totem's main and secondary foremasts were shattered by the Golden Deer, forcing it to face the storm in its most dire straits. It remains unknown whether it drifted to Reborn or sank to the bottom of the sea. Furthermore, 97 sailors of the Andes were killed, 58 were seriously wounded, and the remainder surrendered. A total of 38 officers of the rank of lieutenant or higher were captured, including Rear Admiral Leo von Gavaudan, Count of France and Admiral of the Atlantic Defense Fleet, who surrendered without a fight. On the Drake merchant side, the Golden Hind was severely damaged. While it retained some sailing ability, it was confirmed that it would require a major shipyard overhaul. The Lucky Horseshoe was slightly damaged, with 42 sailors killed and 91 wounded. Furthermore, the alchemical ballista, Hermes Trismegistus, the narwhal, was completely destroyed. After being cleaned up, only the inscribed crossbow arm remained intact. It wasn't until over a month later that Kren personally crafted it into a pendant, becoming a precious decoration in Captain Lorraine's cabin alongside the letter of marque. Of course, that was a story for later. At least at the time, in the peaceful Reborn Bay, Lorraine's heart ached to learn that the whaler's legacy, acquired by his loyal sailors through the sacrifice of several chests of ancient gold, had been shattered. Incredible. I thought something touted as a masterpiece of ancient alchemy truly possessed the legendary indestructibility. Turns out it's just more durable. What are you talking about? Hannah walked in, bewildered. I'm talking about it. Lorraine raised the crossbow arm. It's broken. Hannah's eyes showed obvious disdain. The crossbow has been useless for a long time. Now it's broken. It's just the right time to replace it with 2 mortars and enhance the Golden Hind's assault capability. That being said, Lorraine sighed. Why are you here? The Wasp is back. P.S. Mortars are primarily used by the Army in muzzle-loading guns, characterized by a short barrel, large caliber, short range, and strong recoil. Few countries employed mortars in naval warfare, and Britain was unique among the great maritime powers of the 18th and 19th centuries. The British used mortars as bowguns, primarily in 32, 48, and 68-pounder sizes, with a small number of 110-pounder guns from the engine sail era. They were located on the top deck or upper deck of the forecastle, in pairs, and along a 90-degree curved track, forming a rotating firing platform with a 180-degree frontal angle. This unique configuration gave British ships a completely different level of frontal assault and close combat capabilities than their adversaries, and its practical significance was self-evident. The question then becomes, since everyone could build mortars, why did other powerful nations, despite knowing the disadvantages, refuse to adopt the British design? A. The mortars were too ugly. B. The British patented them. C. The sailors of other nations were too cautious. Correct answer: C. Mortars have excessive recoil, so when used on land, they are often mounted on heavy bases with the barrels elevated, dissipating the recoil through the ground. Such conditions are unavailable at sea. The pressure-bearing capacity of shipboard mortars is limited, and the firing angle of shipborne mortars can only be controlled to within 8 degrees, essentially pointing straight ahead. The British experienced numerous derailments. Each time, a 1 or 2 ton iron block would fly backwards from the forecastle, creating a scene no less gruesome than a direct artillery blow. For this reason, throughout the sailing era, shipborne mortars were considered unorthodox by navies around the world. Even the British had a law prohibiting the use of mortars on warships, but the move was ultimately abandoned due to opposition from sailors and junior officers. Chapter 219, England. Collingwood's Wasp, without waiting for Lorraine to clear the lines, turned back. This suggests the Battle of the Fifth Channel had also concluded. The unfortunate French were defeated by circumstance. When the storm broke out, the more-aft fortress was fortunately located in a relatively wide transit zone, allowing it to turn around and escape. The forward pioneer, however, was completely trapped in the narrow channel, with no way forward or backward. Sweeping the storm, she struggled in the complex, rocky waters, ultimately running aground and sinking. Therefore, the Battle of the Fifth Channel could not have ended later than the main battle at Lorraine. Thinking of this, Lorraine glanced at Collingwood curiously. "It ended so early, and you didn't come to help me." "Major, did you go and rescue people?" Collingwood nodded as a matter of course. "The Andes can't accommodate a third ship alongside. Rather than stand by you helplessly, I should do everything I can to save God's followers, to throw away victory to rescue the enemy." Although Lorraine knew this was based on confidence in boarding battle and the restrictions of the employment regulations, he was still somewhat speechless. "How many people did you save?" 133, "So many, so, some risk is worth it, perhaps." The conversation abruptly ended. It's hard to say whether Collingwood's choice was fundamentally wrong. A fully manned brigade ship has a crew of 180. In the double disaster of heavy rain and grounding, the most optimistic rescue rate would not exceed 20%, which translates to 36 lives. In the end, Collingwood saved 97 more. If 70% of a ship's crew were taken captive, then there was no question of counting the sinking of the Pioneer as a victory for the Wasp. This meant that Collingwood had gained fame, favor, and a tangible victory through this daring act. Had Lorraine been defeated on the main battlefield, this would undoubtedly have been a blunder. However, the boating prowess of Drake's crew was well known to the Halloween fleet, and with the added bonus of torrential rain, the reason for the risk seemed justified. Was this selfishness within the larger picture? Lorraine looked at Collingwood and chuckled indifferently. It occurred to him that since the battle in Channel 5 had concluded, had the outcome of Channel 1, under similar circumstances, also been decided. The sun set. In the distance, only a few plumes of smoke from Lee Robert clung to the clear sky. The bay had calmed after the battle, and the fleet, now fully prepared, sailed towards the final mist. The Golden Hind had lost its combat capability. The direct hit left a crater in the bow, and the hulls of the two ships, both port and side, were scarred in the swift destruction of the totem. Combined with the storm and the rough ramming during the boarding, Lorraine's ship remained intact thanks to Niall's protection. He temporarily switched flagships to the newly captured Andes. The Golden Hind became a captive ship, commanded by Acherin and over 100 sailors, and towed by the Lucky Horseshoe and the Wasp. Also towed was the fortunately recovered totem. The French executed a remarkable self-rescue, blasting off the fallen mast and clearing the decks, leaving only a bare floating island. They weathered the storm with minimal casualties until their surrender. Together, they headed for the first channel. Over 20 kilometers away, Lorraine, standing atop the mainmast's yard, saw the upper column of smoke for the first time. It wasn't the pure white smoke of the guns during the battle, but the thick black smoke of the firefighting. A moment later, the battlefield unfolded before Lorraine's eyes. Nelson's Badger was in a state of extreme misery, half its poop missing, its foremast missing, and 3 massive holes on the starboard side facing Lorraine, as if it were only moments from sinking. But alongside her lay the relatively intact Jupiter. While her hull bore the marks of battle, the ship remained in excellent condition. Most importantly, the Union Jack, representing Great Britain, fluttered in the breeze from the Jupiter's mainmast. Victory? And it seemed a perfect boarding victory. How had they managed it? Confused, the two sides reunited. Lorraine met Nelson on the Jupiter's deck. His eyes were bloodshot, the result of a sleepless night. His uniform was stained with blood, the result of a cut to his right shoulder. Nelson looked disheveled, his face pale, his hair disheveled, but his spirits were excellent, his every move agile and decisive. "I'm relieved to see you're still spirited, Admiral," Lorraine greeted with a smile. Nelson showed no surprise at Lorraine's victory. He just smiled and said, "What are you worried about? Of course it's the reward you promised me." Lorraine stomped his feet on the deck. "Pierce, from now on, you are the temporary captain of the Jupiter," little Pierce responded with a smile, holding a spear. Nelson rolled his eyes. "I thought you'd been so successful this time that you'd be so kind as to leave this ship to me. After all, as you can see, the Badger's condition is even worse than your golden deer. I'll lend it to you without a problem." Lorraine waved his hand. "Until we return to Kingston. You can write a promissory note, or you can make little Pierce your captain, an underage captain. Mercenaries, the mixed bag makes your victory seem so hard to come by. Merchants' arguments are truly disgusting." "Thank you for the compliment," Lorraine bowed dramatically. "Admiral, I'm curious how you managed to fight this battle. Normally, the Badger shouldn't have been able to engage boarding in her condition. A minor accident." Nelson scratched his nose awkwardly with his only good hand. It was indeed a minor accident. When the rainstorm arrived, the Jupiter had already advanced to within 200 meters of the channel entrance, but further progress and the risk of running aground proved incredibly difficult. Nelson had forcefully blocked the Badger at the channel's entrance. Sinking the Badger would have been easy for the Jupiter, but even if it did, waiting for the Badger to reach a passable depth would likely have been enough time for the Jupiter to run aground 3 times. So Nelson proposed boarding, clearing the channel and allowing the Jupiter to pass. In return, the Jupiter couldn't fire during the attack and could only foolishly allow the half-struck Badger to board. The result? Lorraine looked at Nelson unreasonably. "Aren't you afraid they'll reconsider? The initiative is mine." Nelson smiled confidently. "They don't have a choice, mutual destruction or a last-ditch effort." "You sound like a hot-tempered scoundrel. I'm convinced you'll bring me victory. If so, I have an obligation to prepare the reward." "You're the most insane yet most trustworthy employer I've ever encountered." "Same here." The last shroud of mystery surrounding the Battle of Lee Robert Bay had been cleared for Lorraine. The British had won a resounding victory, destroying the town of Lee Robert and nearly wiping out a French Atlantic defense fleet. Operation Halloween had its final leg, coordinating with a previously lost Lechide Company on land. The high-profile destruction of the defense fleet's naval base at Lee Francois would intimidate the French New World Fleet and thereby tip the balance of power in the Battle of the Windward Islands. Victory was assured. Sailing on the calm Atlantic waters, Lorraine and Nelson admired a beautiful sunset side by side. "John Lechide, do you have any news about that captain?" "According to my previous agreement with him, we will meet on the 23rd in the hills 130 kilometers north of Lee Francois. He will raise the white flag of France on the hill where we meet. Before that, I should not and will not inquire about his whereabouts, but I heard from the prisoners that a large-scale slave rebellion broke out in La Trinité. Does it sound like his work?" "It is like a pipe dream for a reinforced company to take through half of Martinique, so I would not be surprised if it was really him who instigated the slave rebellion. The key is how he plans to deal with those slaves." Lorraine bit her lip. "Bringing these destabilizing factors back to the British colonies will cause trouble for us. That's his business." Nelson shrugged. "I believe he will not offend all the landowners for the so-called justice. For us, we only need to consider the war. 10 days left, counting the meeting time. There are only 8 days left. 8 days. Replenishing sailors, besieging Lee Francois, and cooperating with Lechide's plan. It seems that there is still a long way to go." Nelson nodded. "There are always surprises in this world. Even all the bad things that could happen will eventually happen. Please make it through, my friend. For you, for me, and for England, Volume 3, The Wind Blowing to the New World, and Chapter 220 Dawn. May 24, 1779, Dawn. A dense forest 75 kilometers west of Lefrancois, a major town on Martinique's east coast. Even before daybreak, Captain John Leshed, the invincible captain of the ragtag company, had already been stripped of his covers by his idiotic adjutant and escorted out of bed in the most undignified manner. Getting grumpy, everyone gets it. Leshed grumbled as he climbed to his feet, his eyes wide open, and complained about life dully. Olchi, interrupting a lady's sleep will only shorten her beauty's shelf life. If I spoil before I can sell you, you know what? Your mother will bury you in a tulip field. She won't hesitate. Adjutant Harry, with a poker face, shook the covers smooth, his voice expressionless. First, I'm your adjutant, Harry Sheffield, not that insignificant Olchi. Therefore, your mother shouldn't be able to bury me alive. Second, whatever your dreams may be, you're a man, once known in Boston as a chastity killer. So, don't impose your gender swap fantasies on me. It disgusts me. The harsh, cold remark instantly brought Rashid back to reality. He stole a glance at the collar button of his uniform to confirm it was intact, then fixed his gaze with a murderous glare, fiercely meeting his adjutant's. 8th Company Special Regulations, Article 4, Item 1, Second Lieutenant. Harry snapped his legs together and stood at attention. You are not allowed to defame your superiors in any form, sir. Very good, 20 lashes. You must report to Quartermaster Rodney before June 1st to receive your punishment. You are not allowed to interfere with your work. Yes, sir. Feeling relieved? Refreshed, Rashid washed his face and brushed his teeth in the washroom next to the tent. He took the neatly trimmed uniform Harry handed him and put it on meticulously. Time, May 24th, 4:27. What's breakfast today? Who's on duty in the kitchen? Sergeant Ryan is on duty. Breakfast is coffee and the highly praised Ryan sandwich. The highly praised Ryan sandwich is the specialty of the Rascal Company. Although the name itself has the word highly praised, no one in the company likes it, including the pampered company commander. A moment later, Sergeant Ryan, dressed in a chef's hat and a Red Army uniform, arrived with a tray of food. Rashid swallowed hard and picked up a triangular piece of meat from the plate. The basic structure consisted of 2 thick layers of medium-rare beef, smothered in butter, with a roasted poultry breast sandwiched between them. Between the breast and the beef was a layer of half-jarred bacon, the much-praised Ryan sandwich. Well, we have work today. We're diligent British officers, and we have work every day, sir, the chef retorted with a wry smile. But today's work starts especially early, so I think I'll just have coffee. You're still growing, sir, Ryan said with a sad expression. Unless Lieutenant Sheffield agrees, you must finish it all. Rashid turned to Harry with a look of affection, his eyes full of life. Mr. Harry, another disgusting dish worth 20 lashes. Now I owe the quartermaster 40 lashes. With that, Harry walked away. After finishing a nauseating breakfast, Leshed struggled out of the tent, his chest ache slumping. The dim dawn unfolded before him, revealing a magnificent military landscape. His men had transformed. After successively capturing 4 towns, 22 plantations, and the crucial land fortress of La Trinité, the original 200-man company of 5 light guns had swelled into a superb regiment boasting 120 guns of various types, 3,000 infantry, 600 cavalry, and over 2,000 auxiliary troops. His regiment was a riot of colors, with black predominating, yellow a secondary presence, and white the least dominant. In his view, while it might not last, it was undoubtedly a beautiful pyramid before it collapsed. Moreover, the more beautiful a flower, the shorter its bloom. Its inability to last wasn't a flaw in this pyramid, but rather its greatest charm. Leshed stamped his foot in ecstasy, glancing up at his 3 right-hand men, Adjutant Harry, Sergeant Ryan, and Quartermaster Rodney. Yesterday I met our unsmiling admiral and that annoying businessman at the agreed place. Unfortunately, the Navy did a great job. A week ago, they wiped out the defense fleet, captured a major general, and even drove onto their flagship. This means that there are no more obstacles to bombarding Lefrancois at sea. The only ones left are the 24 guns on land. It also means that if Operation Halloween fails again, all the responsibility will be on us. I made a bet with that annoying businessman. The bet was a box of Pinot Noir. I bet that I would be the first to knock on the paper-pasted door of Lefrancois and prevent those guns from throwing a single shell into the sea. This is a matter of face and salary, gentlemen. If I lose, you will have to pay for the wine. Ryan widened his eyes and trembled with anger. Why? Leshed shrugged roguely. I don't want a bottle of this box of wine. If you win, it's all yours." The deal was done, and double happiness came. After dealing with his easy-to-handle subordinates, Rashid burped and cursed. "Anyone free? Bring over our infantry commander, Mr. Sander, and cavalry commander, Mr. Lachman. They're the real deal in this battle, so we need to coax them over, soon." A tall black man and a muscular Indian approached Rashid, bowing down in unison, 5 steps apart. "Savior, your loyal servant greets you. I've told you so many times, your friends and leaders. You need to stand tall and set an example for your people." Rashid smiled warmly, but made no move to approach or support them. "Besides, my servant is Lieutenant Sheffield. I don't like your kind of flattery, and neither does the lieutenant." A bewildered Harry stepped forward, helped the bewildered Sander and Lachman to their feet, and followed Rashid into the tent. A military map of Martinique lay spread out in the tent. Rashid turned around, picked up his baton from the table, and drew a large circle in the center of the map. "Friends, your revolution has reached its most crucial moment." Despite his unoriginal opening remarks, Rashid delivered them with restrained yet passionate intensity. His subdued, slightly trembling voice was perfectly timed, filling the tent with awe. Even Harry and Ryan felt a sense of veneration. Sander and Lachman were so excited they nearly prostrated themselves again, only managing to maintain their composure. "Savior, is it finally our turn to fight?" "Don't worry, my friend," Rashid gently pointed at the map, speaking softly. "Before you accept a mission, you must understand what you are doing. Like a true leader, Martinique has 3 major military strongholds. One is La Trinité, which we have already captured, one is Le François, which we are about to attack, and the third is Fort-de-France. The heart of the French's evil rule. These 3 strongholds house 70% of the French army and the entire navy on the island, as well as nearly 50% of the regional councillors, 40% of the chambers of commerce, and 60% of the cargo throughput. Own them, and you own Martinique. Own them, and you own Martinique." Rashid paused. "So, what should you do?" "Fight," the 2 leaders roared in unison. "Yes, fight. A revolution without bloodshed is not your revolution. A struggle that you don't personally carry out is not your struggle." Rashid walked over, around them, to the exit of the military tent, and breathed in the fresh sea breeze. "Tonight, when the sun sets and night falls, my people will teach you the last lesson. Firing, 200 soldiers will be scattered behind 120 cannons, teaching you how to fire. Then, your soldiers will charge, burn, kill, and seize your freedom and independence from the evil French, and your opponents are only 2 companies, 300 soldiers and less than 5,000 mob-like pioneers, including the elderly, children and women. Victory is yours." Sander snorted heavily, trying to maintain his last sanity. "That, Savior, I once heard the manager of the plantation say that Le François is one of the 2 major naval bases in Martinique. Although we can deal with the French on land, but at sea, God sent me to help you." Rashid interrupted Sander and chanted, "The Lord guided me and my companions here to reward your piety and conversion. So, we will help you and do our best to help you." "Could it be, as you thought, Le François' navy has been defeated? You only need to destroy the army's resistance and demolish the artillery batteries, and the Great British Navy will help you defeat the counterattack of the settlers. Then, my men and I will board the ship and command the invincible naval force to help you destroy France's last reliance and hand over a complete Martinique to you, the noble and proud free people. Really, really, the Lord's believers are born free. This is the glory that every British soldier is willing to die for." Rashid stared at Sander, looking down at him. "Now, tell me, are you willing to shed blood for freedom?" "Willing." Sander and Lachman looked at each other, and each saw the determination in each other's eyes. "For the freedom of our people, we will sacrifice our lives, at all costs." "Well, come and praise me." Chapter 221 Color Revolution. The sun had completely set behind the mountains, and night had descended. 7 o'clock, perhaps even later, was Le François's traditional dinner time. At this time of year, families gathered for family gatherings, and the streets were deserted. France is a restless country, and the more restless it is, the more it cherishes these moments of peace and tranquility, refusing to be easily shaken. But today was clearly different. In the morning, the merchant ships anchored at the docks had first fled, followed by the Fortress, the last remaining surviving ship of the defense fleet. The panic was so intense that not even all the disembarked officers had time to board. The citizens of Le François vaguely remembered the third officer's curses at the dock. They found it strange at the time, but within that strangeness came a sense of foreboding. The defense fleet had once been Lee Francois's patron saint, powerful and proud. If the city were likened to the origin of its name, the defense fleet was the lance of the Night King, and the coastal batteries were the unshakable shield. Francis I. Vangelheim, the Night King, passionate and artistic, brave and invincible. Surely the man who named the city never imagined that one day, the indestructible spear would be broken at sea by the English, and the remaining shaft would flee without a fight, without even offering a reason to the citizens living in the city. Is the end coming? People were puzzled, troubled, whispering among themselves, yet afraid to speak aloud. They didn't know what they were waiting for, but they waited subconsciously, their heads raised, their eyes wide open, gazing at the end of the bay until noon. As the sun reached its zenith, the mystery was solved. The massive silhouette of the Andes appeared at the edge of the sea, followed by the Jupiter, the horseshoe of fortune, and an unfamiliar brig with a wasp carved on its bow. Those warships, once the pride of Lee Francois, lay silently anchored, out of range of the coastal batteries, their mainmasts blazing with the glaring Union Jack banner of the British. So, this is the end of the world? People thought they had solved the mystery, that the Titans who protected the country had lost their minds, but at least they still had the most advanced coastal artillery. The artillery was an unshakable shield. Under their protection, a mere 4 warships were not enough to endanger the peaceful life of the French. But they soon realized that their optimism was too early. In the afternoon, sharp whistles resounded through the sky, and the station army suddenly went crazy. Even the city hall joined in the chaos, and the streets and alleys echoed with hoarse and desperate urgent calls for conscription, a warning to the citizens of Lee Francois. The brutal and despicable slave rebels have besieged the town, and the bandits from Britain are trying to plunder our property. The city hall asks every citizen who can afford to stand up. Men between the ages of 14 and 50 should go to the barracks to collect weapons, and women should go to the city hall to assist with logistics. We are in imminent danger. Only then did the true doomsday finally reveal its claws. Outside the city, amidst the hills and woods, along the winding paths, the hills and plains were covered in black and yellow thugs, their eyes glaring and their mouths spitting. Where did they come from? Well-informed merchants in the interior quickly spread the news. It was said that a month ago, the greedy plantation owners in La Trinité had aroused public anger. The slaves there had seized the weapons and artillery stocks and, taking advantage of the interval between the French and British wars, had rampaged across the land, destroying 4 towns. But 10 days earlier, this mob had disappeared in L'Île-Lamentin, which was closer to Fort-de-France. To prevent this untimely rebellion from interfering with the ongoing decisive battle between France and England, the army and militia from across the island had clearly gathered at the key roads outside Fort-de-France, setting a tight net for them. Clearly. The wise finally understood. Yes, the nobles of Fort-de-France had protected their town, and this mob could not threaten their property. Since this group of mobs couldn't go to Fort-de-France, they naturally ran to Lee Francois. The mob, the warships, the danger to their lives, the loss of dignity, all of this was caused by the nobles of Fort-de-France. It was all their fault. The first person cursed, the second person passed it on, the 10th person, the 100th person, the 1000th person. Before the sun set, everyone in the town knew that the nobles of Fort-de-France had colluded with the British and brought a mob to plunder Lee Francois. The men picked up their guns and cursed, the women held up their bread and cursed, and the old people hid in the basement of the house, holding their children and cursing. May hell be empty and taking wealth and glory, they cursed in unison until the sun set and despair fell. Sander and Latreman stood side by side at the forefront of the team. Behind them were skinny infantrymen wearing strange clothes and marching in crooked formations. On both wings were skinny cavalrymen with formations that twisted and turned, and mounts of different sizes. And then there were the rear guard, coastal artillery, light artillery, heavy artillery, mortars, even naval guns, horse-drawn carts, mule-drawn carts, donkey-drawn carts, and even deer-drawn carts. This was their invincible force. Sander and Latreman watched the sun gradually sink with pride. Sander, it's getting dark. Yes, after dark, we can lead our people to revenge. Yes, and the Savior's fleet will help us deal with the enemy at sea. Yes, after victory, he will be separated from us. We will attack the heart of the French from land, and he and his fleet will respond to our attack from the sea. Yes. Silence fell for a long time. Do you believe it? Sander remained silent. But Latreman continued, Grandpa Bags taught me that no one helps others without asking for anything in return. Even the most merciful gods expect sacrifice from their believers. What do you want to hear me say? Sanders suddenly asked. The Savior is white, and the French are white too. White people are all on the same path. Even if we overthrow the French, we'll just change masters. Is that what you want to hear? No. Rashomond's face was filled with horror. No. You misunderstood. Sanders smiled, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. But that's exactly what I wanted to say. I really mean it. Rashomond's eyes widened. Think it strange? Unexpected? Don't understand, Sanders questioned softly, not expecting Rashomond to answer. That was just foreplay. In order to tell his life story, he needed to listen carefully. My father was once the chief of a large tribe. He was warlike and brave. He loved to exchange men and women, old people and children from hostile tribes with white people for food and weapons to strengthen his own tribe, but one day, he encountered another powerful tribe equipped with white people's firearms. As a result, many of his people died, and even he was seriously injured. Before he died, he asked me to take the remaining people and hide in the jungle, and never let the white people find us. I disobeyed his last wish. Sanders exhaled. I found my godfather, a gentle white man who had done business with my father for many years. My sister even gave birth to his children. Then, I became a slave. My people, my wife, the sister who married the white man, and her children all became slaves. From then on, I understood that perhaps every race has good and bad people, but white people do not. When you are strong, he is your loyal friend, but when you are weak, he will become your master. Angels and demons coexist in them. From the moment they are born, they have evil in their souls. This is what white people are like. Even saviors will covet our freedom. They can never be trusted, but did we really have a choice? Sanders stared at Rashomond. When we first met that man, we were just slaves who were about to starve to death. As our numbers grew, he controlled our lives in terms of guns, cannons, and food. He never allowed more people holding guns than the white people under his command. Only today is an exception. You asked me if you would board the ship honestly after the victory? I tell you, he would, because today, he will teach us how to fire cannons. Once our people learn how to fire, we won't need new masters. If he doesn't board the ship, he will go to hell. Isn't this what he taught us? This is a color revolution, my friend. Sanders patted Rashomond's shoulder heavily. Yellow and black are friends, and white is just an enemy. Yellow and black are friends, and white is an enemy, Rashomond repeated, his eyes becoming more and more fiery. He said, it's getting dark, my friend. Before he finished speaking, a series of orders came from the rear. Fire angle 30 degrees, distance 850, reload 1 round, test fire, fire. Chapter 222 An ordinary buffet. A formal buffet was being held on the deck of the Andes. All officers above the rank of lieutenant from the Halloween Fleet's Navy and senior sailors above the rank of seamen from the Chamber of Commerce were invited. The food was fresh souvenirs provided by Leshad during the meeting between the Navy and the Army yesterday. The rumbling of cannons and continuous wails served as the accompaniment, while the distant sea of fire and the ruins of the town served as the stage. With nothing to do, the overall atmosphere was barely enjoyable. Lorraine and Nelson stood side by side at the bow railing, champagne glasses in hand, each holding a monocular, gazing boredly at the battle on land. The bombing sites are sparse, and the angles aren't good. If it weren't for the abundant shrapnel, the captain's army would have had a hard time leveling Le François. Lorraine smacked his lips, a hint of regret in his tone. Nelson couldn't help but chuckle. I heard those slaves fired real artillery for the first time today, and it's quite impressive that they achieved such a result, but what a waste of time. Oh, the church was blown up. Whoever fired the cannon must be hated by God. Drake, I know you're a pagan, but there's no need to flaunt your faith in front of a Puritan. I apologize, Lorraine shrugged, lowering the scope. Admiral, even accounting for the obvious stray shells, the captain's artillery is too far from the dock. Extended fire is unlikely to reach the coastal batteries. Doesn't he still have slave infantry and Mamluks? Those cavalrymen on nags are worthy of being called Mamluks. Lorraine laughed and cried. Never mind. For a case of fine wine, I give my allies full credit, Le François wailed amid the roar of the cannon. As the headquarters of the Martinique army, the French had stored a large amount of modern munitions and ammunition at Fort La Trinité. These accompanied Leshad across half the island, and only today were they officially put to use. Leshid had no intention of saving ammunition. Under the guise of practice, his only order to his artillerymen was to fire until the barrels burned. This order was carried out for a full 3 hours, until after 10 o'clock in the evening, when the third light gun exploded, wounding a white soldier for the first time. The order to clear the infantry was officially given. Filled with hatred and hope, the infantry charged the raised front line, breaking it in less than half an hour, encountering virtually no resistance. The cavalry then entered the city, hunting down every fleeing man and woman along the spiderweb-like roads, unleashing hellish carnage in every corner of the town. By this point, Lefrancois's destruction was certain. Coastal batteries were a formidable weapon in naval warfare, especially the newer ones capable of firing shrapnel shells, a natural enemy of wooden sailing ships. However, those massive coastal guns could not be easily turned, and even if one or two managed to maneuver, the crews were unable to fire on the city they protected. Their destruction was inevitable. Lorraine had never doubted this outcome, but she had never imagined that Leshid would resort to such utterly brutal tactics, completely out of step with Western conventions of warfare, to achieve her goals. The French likely hadn't anticipated this outcome either. Therefore, even though the closest point between the two lines was only 500 or 600 meters, the French failed to mount a truly effective counterattack until the day of their destruction. In short, the war was over. In the early hours of the morning, the agreed-upon signal lights illuminated the docks. The Andes and the Lucky Horseshoe slowly approached the docks as planned. Lorraine squinted his eyes, only to witness a remarkable sight in the firelight. The 8th Company and the slaves in a standoff, and the trembling citizens of Lefrancois, protected by the 8th Company. Ordered to halt port entry. Andes and Lucky Horseshoe, crossbars, gun ports open, launches. All hands. First alert, sharp whistles echoed across the two massive ships, and sailors rushed across the decks, shouting and turning their ships. Everyone's heart was in their throat. They were less than 100 meters from the dock, and the muzzles of the coastal defense guns in the forts could be discerned with the naked eye. What if Leshid's slave army lost control at this moment? A group of slaves who could fire, manning the nearly intact forts dotting the coast, would leave the Andes and the Lucky Horseshoe stranded, with no chance of survival. Damn it, what on earth was going on ashore? Lorraine gritted her teeth and called to Acheron. Acheron, take a musketeer squad and find Leshid or his 3 lackeys. Bring them to me, the sooner the better. Acheron, realizing the gravity of the situation, for once dropped his nonchalant demeanor, saluted with his knees, and disembarked. Soon, the boat sank away from the Andes. Acheron circled close to the dock and quickly located Leshid among the crowd. He dragged the restless army captain to Lorraine. Captain Leshid, I await your explanation, Lorraine said, suppressed in anger. I'll explain, but first, please allow me to express my admiration for you. Leshid hid himself in an invisible corner on the dock with a playful smile. I was right. Compared to the iron-blooded admiral and the uncreative major, Mr. President, you are more suitable to take charge of the task of picking me up. No hesitation, no panic, your response was perfect. Thanks to you, those French guys no longer have any reason to doubt us. Suspicion, yes, suspicion, Rashid repeated. Please continue to be vigilant, Mr. President. Although we are the British Royal Navy who came here to fight, because we encountered the atrocities of slavery, we have now decided to abandon the position of one country with another and rescue as many civilians as possible in the spirit of humanity and chivalry. Lorraine immediately understood what Rashid meant. Do you think this unnecessary lie is useful? Of course it is useful, Rashid smiled confidently. This land operation lasted 20 days. There were no living prisoners during the process, and the soldiers of the 8th Company never appeared on the list of looting in occupation. Even in Lefrancois, my people cut in from the north along the coastline, like a task force sent by the fleet. Every citizen we rescued can testify to this, but you can't hide a land operation that lasted more than 20 days from everyone. Rumors are always inevitable. What's more, we defeated the Atlantic Defense Fleet this time. The angry French have plenty of reasons to frame this sudden slave uprising on our heads. After all, 5 towns were destroyed. Lorraine became more and more interested as he listened. Are you sure you can make the whole thing a frame-up? It's actually just a simple trick. Leshid gestured. I have an agreement with the 2 slave commanders to give up the guns, cannons, food and wealth looted along the way, and leave them to them as capital for the revolution. In return, they must allow me to take away the poor mayor and the more than 100 miserable citizens picked up along the way, and not show any connection between us. Don't they think your way of handling it is strange? No. Because I told them that I would send these people to Fort-de-France, and then use them as a cover to launch a surprise attack to destroy the French New World fleet. Don't they want to be the king of the mountain? It's in their interest to help me conceal my identity. Lorraine sorted it out in his mind. Concealment, close approach, and surprise attack. Aside from grossly underestimating the French intelligence and overestimating the destructive power of the Halloween fleet, Leshid's proposed plan of action did have the potential to be feasible. But how should I put it? Those who fantasized about founding a nation with a few thousand improvised thugs probably never considered their opponent's intelligence. Even slaves who barely knew how to use a cannon couldn't accurately estimate the power of a warship. And most importantly, Nelson had no plans to attack Fort-de-France. By chance, Leshid's script, though hopelessly foolish, unexpectedly satisfied everyone, especially the logical interpretation, which was impeccable. Lorraine gave Leshid a deep look. This man's evil was deep in his bones, but as a comrade, he was indeed perfect and competent. Lorraine smiled playfully. Over the past 20 days, you destroyed 5 towns, including Trelawnite and Le François. Because of the use of shrapnel, Le François probably suffered the heaviest casualties. Of course, the plantations along the way would have been worse off, but that doesn't matter. With you, you won't leave any living testimony there. This is a troublesome matter, even for victory. What's more, the Army's actions have nothing to do with the Navy, and you didn't inform them in advance. Without a proper reason, Sir Parker and Nelson probably don't want to share the responsibility with you, so you found the survivors of Le François to testify for you, proving that British soldiers abided by the norms of the civilized world and, between victory and humanity, firmly chose the latter. Perhaps there will be other voices to refute, but their persuasiveness will not be greater than that of the survivors. Or perhaps there will be revelations from slaves, but it would be strange if the mob didn't blame others in order to atone for their sins. You have found a perfect excuse for Great Britain. Compared to who should bear the guilt of the war, it is obvious that being born innocent is a better choice. Lorraine sighed and said, Captain, I admire your wisdom from the bottom of my heart. A hint of shyness appeared on Leshid's pretty face. It was not the kind of shame for doing something wrong, but more like the embarrassment caused by the compliment. He smiled and said, Since Mr. President has thought it through, I don't think you need to teach you what to do next. Probably, no. Lorraine sighed and raised his voice. Order. The Andes switches to solid bullets, targets the 3 nearby artillery positions, and fires freely. The Lucky Horseshoe maintains a deterrent posture towards the crowd at the dock and does not move without orders. Leshid's face suddenly turned pale. Drake. What are you doing? Play the role I should play and do the show I should do. Amid the noisy artillery orders, Lorraine's voice was cold. Take a close look at those slaves, my captain, and think about whether you have missed some key information. Those who confronted each other on the dock, whether they were your soldiers or the slaves you rescued, they were not professional actors. But their acting skills successfully deceived me. That hostility, that tension, that struggle and hesitation at the critical moment of life and death, and something I am most familiar with, I call it ambition. I know very well that is not something an actor can perform. Lorraine spoke, inching closer to Rashid, looking down at this beautiful yet rather sinister comrade. For the safety of you and your men, I'm willing to cooperate with your performance. But for my own safety and mine, I need to make the stage safer. That's the bottom line for this farce. As for how to keep it going, that's your business, not mine. Rashid took a half step back in disgust. Tisk, coward. Chapter 223, Fire of Revenge. The rumble of heavy artillery echoed over the dock, causing the embankment to collapse and the rocks to sink. Drake's sailors had experience with ground attacks at Lee Robert, and this time, armed with 24-pound guns, they executed the destruction with remarkable skill. This was likely due to the sailors' inherent hatred for the coastal defense batteries. No one, including Lorraine, could tolerate being in the battery's crosshairs. The first round was to destroy the battery's sea-facing function, primarily targeting its stone gun hulls, aiming to collapse them and ensure the soldiers manning them had no shelter. The second round was to destroy the battery's structure, shifting the target downward to the towering base. One base proved exceptionally strong, even the heavy artillery shells could not destroy it. The goal was to continue lowering, attacking the dock seawall supporting the battery. It's impossible to count how many heavy shells the Andes unleashed, but after 4 rounds, The 3-gun batteries that had guaranteed Drake's ship's safety were completely gone, reduced to rubble and rubble, sliding into the deep sea along with a few, long unrecognizable bodies. Lorraine used his telescope to track the perspectives of the opposing groups with great interest. Leshid returned to shore and, along with the valiant Mayor Lefrancois, took shelter closest to the sea, presumably ready to leap into the water at any moment. His 3 chieftains, pale-faced, reached the center of the standoff, dancing to the rhythm of the artillery fire, whether they were trying to soothe the emotions on both sides or tirelessly devising far-fetched justifications for the bombardment. Their work was effective. For an entire hour, neither side managed to avoid an accidental exchange of fire. Lorraine couldn't tell whether he felt relieved or regretful, but now that his self-preservation was over, he naturally fulfilled his duty to his comrades. The Lucky Horseshoe, proceed to port on alert, and receive refugees and friendly forces in an orderly manner. The Andes, approaching, lies horizontal. Remember, anyone armed on shore is a target, do not let your guard down. Under his orders, Bell personally took the helm, maneuvering the Lucky Horseshoe into its berth in a difficult reverse maneuver. Sail not lowered, anchor not sunk, and secured only by 2 thick sail cables. Even if the planks lay flat, the privilege of leaving port at any time must be preserved. The entire ship's crew gathered on the main deck, lining up on either side with their rifles in hand. Each rifle's hammer was cocked, muzzle raised slightly. After barely stabilizing, the crew began throwing lines down the plank, hoisting only 4 men aboard at a time. Once aboard, they were crammed into the stern hold, forbidden from remaining on deck for even a moment. It took nearly 2 hours for the 200 soldiers of the 8th Company and the 227 surviving refugees to receive just over 400 people. As the number of hostages on shore dwindled, the slaves on the dock grew increasingly restless. To appease them, Lorraine was forced to fire a volley from the upper secondary guns into the open air. The blast attracted more slaves, but at least things settled down. Around 3 in the morning, the last 4 hostages were hoisted aboard. Bell hurriedly ordered the moorings cut, not even waiting to reel in the thick ropes. The Lucky Horseshoe plunged forward, away from the embankment, sending everyone on board careening. Lorraine exhaled deeply, watched the Lucky Horseshoe fleeing further and further, and suddenly gave the order. Massacre is the most barbaric act in the world. Gentlemen and ladies, regardless of nationality or creed, since we embrace civilization, we have an obligation to avenge it. Atron's voice followed Lorraine's. All guns, attention. Shotgun, straight ahead, saturation fire, fire. Thick smoke instantly enveloped half of the Andes' side, and a few tenths of a second later, the roar of cannons filled the air. Sander, who had personally overseen the dock operations to complement Leshid's theatrics, stared in disbelief. Savior, you've plotted against me. A perfect ending, perhaps. Before the slaves could recall the opportunity to activate the distant battery and the land guns outside the city, the Andes unleashed 4 rounds of mortar shells, hoisted its sails, and fled. She was greeted by heartbreaking cheers from the poop of the Lucky Horseshoe. Not long after, the Halloween fleet rendezvoused off the coast of Lefrancois, with the commanders of the operation gathered aboard the temporary flagship, the Jupiter. Before Lorraine could say anything, he saw Leshid leading a flushed, portly gentleman onto the deck. His eyes searched the ostentatiously dressed commanders, and soon, amidst the military uniforms, he spotted the tall, civilian-dressed Lorraine, and excitedly pounced upon him. Are you the current captain of the Andes? Captain Leshid's superior, the commander of the rescue operation, Mr. Drake. Lorraine rolled his eyes and went to look for Leshid. Leshid shrugged indifferently, stepped forward and introduced, as you thought, this is Sir Alland, the mayor of Lefrancois. Lorraine nodded slightly, putting on a sincere but not overly intimate smile. Drake Chamber of Commerce, Lorraine Andrew Drake sends you greetings. The sir did not care about Lorraine's reserve at all, strode forward and shook Lorraine's hand. Mr. Drake, you are a true hero. Your decision saved the lives of the Lefrancois people, and your final bombardment avenged the deaths of my compatriots. I just made the decision a civilized person should make, sir. Lorraine broke free from his hand without a trace. Even in the midst of a national war, mankind should not forget the teachings of the Lord. Kindness and humanity are the principles we uphold, and no temptation should or can override them. Well said. The sir had tears in his eyes. Well said, Mr. Drake. At this time, the annoying Leshid came up again, explaining in a voice like a narration without emotion. The sir remembered his wife and son who were killed by the mob. When we arrived at the city hall, the mob had already broken through the main gate. Unfortunately, we only rescued the Sir and his 2 young children, so Lorraine could only comfort him against his conscience. I am in mourning. The knight wiped away his tears and raised his head resolutely. My experience is only an insignificant part of the entire Le François tragedy. Among the 4,762 citizens, only 227 were lucky enough to be rescued. This is all my fault. I have no right to be sad before I have confessed this sin to God and the king. You are too hard on yourself. Lorraine carefully chose his words. Sir, although it is a bit inappropriate now, the survivors of Le François are being taken in on enemy warships. They are very panicked and can't see the future. In order not to let this good deed end in vain, you should stay with them until the French envoys take you back to your homeland. At the same time, I will order my crew to reduce contact with you, but don't worry, there will be no shortage of food, water, medicine and warm clothes. I guarantee it with my honor. You are right. The knight was shocked. I shouldn't leave my people now. God sent you and your crew here, but not everyone can get God's revelation. I should go back, Captain Lishad. Lorraine glared at him. Please take the knight back to the Lucky Horseshoe immediately, and then deliver my orders to Captain Judia. Thank you, that's what I should do, sir. Lishad quickly left with the knight. In his restlessness, the knight even forgot to say goodbye to the real owner of this place, Admiral Nelson. But Nelson said nothing. Only after their boat had sailed away did he and Collingwood block Lorraine at the railing. Drake, I have a lot of questions that need answers. Why was the planned pickup delayed for 3 hours? Why did you fire during the process? Also, why did the mayor of Le François come to your ship? I have to think about how to report the whole thing to you concisely. Lorraine rubbed his brow painfully. Before that, I remember when I deployed the infantry. Did I capture a manor owner and his family? Yes, Mr. Robert of Robert Manor. What happened? Where are they now? Barbados. The idea at the time was not to let him reveal our news until the end of Operation Halloween. Sure enough, Lorraine sighed depressedly. I remember I promised him that I would return the manor to him after the war. Nelson looked strange. Are you interested in that remote manor? No, it's just very likely. I have to break my promise. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 224 Tragedy Fermentation. The Windward Islands. From February to June 1779, this narrow island chain, displacing the smoky North American continent, briefly became the focal point and center of the entire New World. The French, along with their Dutch allies, assembled a formidable force of 28 warships in these waters, intending to launch a campaign against the English colonial fleet commanded by Sir John Parker. This was exactly what Sir John Parker had hoped for. Leveraging Britain's superior naval power, he quickly assembled a formidable fleet of 22 ships to confront the Franco-Dutch forces at sea. Fierce fighting raged within the island chain, with the two sides trading blows and a close victory that lasted until May. No one could have imagined that a casual move by Sir John, intended to break the stalemate, would so profoundly alter the course of the war. The Halloween fleet was born. This small, cryptically named fleet comprised 2 small brigs and 2 young, unknown officers. Lacking support from the Marines, they seconded an even younger army captain and his company. To bolster their forces, they hired a young merchant and his 5th-class ship, thus forming a modest fleet with an average commander under 20 years old, consisting of only 3 ships, 100 guns, and 200 Marines. No one had truly expected them, but these young commanders surprised everyone with their astonishing achievements. On May 10th, the fleet ambushed the French brig HMS Fortunate at Hell's Gate in the waters off L'Île Lorraine, winning the battle and sinking 1 ship, mercenary prisoners counted as sunk, according to the principle of military merit. On May 13th, the fleet, now strengthened to 4 ships with 128 guns, bombarded Le Robert, destroying the docks and blockading the bay, sinking a total of 17 French merchant ships. On May 14th, the fleet engaged the powerful Atlantic Defense Fleet in Le Robert Bay and achieved a resounding victory, sinking 1 4th-class galleon, 1 5th-class galleon, and 2 6th-class brigs, for a total of 4 ships. Only the HMS Fortress escaped unscathed. On May 24th, After a 10-day hiatus, the fleet once again blockaded Francois Bay. The French fortress fled without a fight, and the merchant ships anchored in the harbor were scattered. Coincidentally, during the fleet's operation, the largest slave revolt in history broke out in the French overseas department of Martinique. On May 4, the uprising began at the Rogue plantation on the Carhaix Peninsula, led by Sander, a slave from the plantation. On May 8, the insurgents overran the island's army fortress, La Trinité, greatly increasing their strength. Over the next 2 weeks, the insurgents swept across half the island, successively breaking through the garrison's blockades, plundering 3 towns, and steadily expanding their forces through brutal massacres and annexations of plantations. On May 24, they also arrived at Francois, joining the Halloween fleet, which was rampaging at sea, as if by agreement, to lay siege to this important naval base. What followed was the Francois tragedy, which shocked the entire civilized world. The mob slaughtered the town, killing 300 French soldiers and over 4,000 civilians in just half a day. For a long time, the number of those who managed to escape the ordeal was believed to be less than 400. Survivors subsequently fled sporadically to nearby towns and, in a wave of refugees, to Fort-de-France, bringing the tragedy of Francois to the attention of the Fort-de-France authorities. Rumors circulated that the British had organized and led the Cahoe riots. Reports claimed that red British uniforms were seen among the rioters. Reports claimed that the Halloween fleet had joined the mob in attacking Francois and that its ships had bombarded the docks that night, causing heavy casualties. The French were enraged. Even facing a decisive naval battle with Sir Parker, they drew from their precious fleet a powerful fleet of 8 ships, led by a third-class battleship, vowing to make the heinous perpetrators pay for the tragic deaths. Meanwhile, the Halloween fleet. On May 27, the Halloween fleet sailed into Grenada, the southernmost of the Windward Islands, and remained on this small British colony for 5 days, partly to reunite with a damaged fleet that had already begun resting, and partly to refresh the weary sailors and passengers. However, the island was still within the radius of the Battle of the Windward Islands, making it unsuitable for the Halloween fleet, which harbored countless secrets and faced a complex situation in terms of both personnel and ships, to remain there for a long time. On June 2, the fleet departed port, sailed around Barbados, and towed the damaged ships along the southern Caribbean route, arriving back at Kingston Royal Port on the night of June 15. Only after the fleet finally dropped its anchor chains in the heavily defended Royal Navy port did Nelson and Lorraine, who had been on edge all the way, finally feel relieved. The most vulnerable wretch didn't even disembark. That night they were transferred aboard Collingwood's Wasp to Savannah, where General Clinton was stationed. The most vulnerable damaged ships were also important. This matter concerned the Chamber of Commerce's input and output. Lorraine dragged Chuck out of bed overnight, leaving him gaping at the dock for a full 30 minutes. The Andes, the Jupiter, the Golden Deer, the Totem, the Lucky Horseshoe. Lorraine had taken 1 ship to participate in the mercenary war, and a month later returned to Port Royal with 5 large ships. Chuck felt his mind boggling. President, are you going on a robbery? Lorraine thought carefully, then nodded solemnly. Who did you rob? The New World Fleet of the Kingdom of France. It seems to be called the Atlantic Defense Fleet. You robbed an army. My God, with such a large scale, aren't you afraid that some fleet will regard us as a thorn in the flesh? That possibility is not very high. Lorraine slowed down his speech as much as possible to make it easier for Chuck to understand. First, the Admiral of the Defense Fleet is preparing to visit Lieutenant Colonel Nelson's private residence. Of course, it is semi-forced. Second, the ships of that fleet are basically here, and there are 2 brigs left. One went to Noton, and the other fled without a fight, so it will probably be transferred away from the New World soon. Lorraine paused. And third, if nothing unexpected happens, I will soon become a hero in France. You don't have to worry about the French trade routes that you have worked hard to open up being wasted. Even if Britain and France continue to fight, Drake's name is worthy of the privilege of doing business. Chuck blinked. Can you tell me what you have been through? It's a long story, Chuck. You will know everything sooner or later, but now, you have to find a dock to repair these good ships before they sink. By the way, you have to return the 24 pounds on the Andes to the Navy, that damn non-civilian use. Yes, Doc. Once awakened from the dream, Chuck showed an elasticity and running speed that amazed Lorraine, and disappeared into the night in a short while. Lorraine pounded his waist tiredly, raised his head, and saw Nelson alone, waving at him gently from the right distance. "It seems that my charm is greater than the sum of Sir Allende's youngest daughter and Count Givaudan, my respected former governor." Lorraine greeted him with a smile. Nelson also smiled, and it was rare to see him relaxed. "Your charm is indeed far greater than love and future, my respected friend." "Friend? Partner? No, what you have brought me has far exceeded our agreement, and your dedication has moved me." Nelson patted Lorraine's arm gratefully. "I don't have many friends, and the only ones I think are worthy of entrusting my life to are you and Collingwood. This is the biggest gain of my trip." Lorraine took a half step back and nodded reservedly. "Are the refugees settled?" "Of course, every one of them is settled properly. They are important witnesses, and when the Lord wins, they can make our victory even more glorious." "Your victory, my business, except for the glory, our pursuits are very different. A businessman's thinking will sooner or later become an obstacle for you." Nelson shrugged, seeming quite helpless. "Well, I want to repay a businessman friend within my ability. Can you give me any good advice, suggestions?" "Within my ability, yes, within the ability of a colonel, so it's the colonel's area." Lorraine laughed heartily. "Let me see 24 of the latest 18-pound flintlock cannons, to fill the gap left by the confiscated heavy artillery, as well as 2 32-pound mortars and matching deep rails. I'm hoping to get them at cost price. They're not non-civilian items, and while they were rare on the market, I think you should be able to make an exception, Colonel." Chapter 225 The Road of Loyalty. Time is the most diligent and impartial god in the world. No matter where its favored ones reside, it will never stop its pendulum, nor allow anything to stagnate. On June 6, while the Halloween, towing its damaged ship, was still slowly circling the coast of Barbados, Fort-de-France received reliable intelligence reports of a mixed fleet of 7 ships resting in St. George's Harbor, Grenada. Judging by the markings on the ship's bows, they were almost certainly the Halloween fleet responsible for the Le-François tragedy. This intelligence ignited the fury and panic of the Franco-Dutch fleet. Judging from the battlefield situation, the marginal conflict between the two fleets was intensifying. Recently, there had been a series of small-scale naval battles, with 3 reports on the most intense day. This meant that the main fleets of both sides were now very close. It was like 2 hurricanes heading towards each other. The closer the centers of the air masses, the stronger the cyclonic turbulence. The final decisive battle was poised to begin. According to the maps compiled by the French and Dutch staffs, the main British force was most likely within 100 kilometers west of Grenada. Meanwhile, the Halloween fleet, a sinister yet undoubtedly formidable force, suddenly arrived at Port St. George, like a jackal ambush on the battlefield where 2 lions were battling for supremacy. What was it planning? Or perhaps, more profoundly, what was Peter Parker, the cunning Brit, up to? Fort-de-France urgently began a second round of simulations, quickly concluding that the Halloween fleet would breach the outer defenses at the cost of 2 or 3 ships and enter the fray at the moment when both battle lines were at their most vulnerable. The Andes' 24-pounder guns would become a formidable battle line destroying weapon. With the escorts of the Jupiter and the Golden Hind, the stalemated combined fleet would struggle to effectively contain them. This was an ambush capable of changing the tide of battle. The results of this simulation were quickly relayed to the combined fleet's flagship, the HMS Glory. Vice Admiral Ramon, admiral of both the French New World Fleet and the Franco-Dutch combined fleet, immediately convened a high-level simulation meeting with the fleet staff to thoroughly verify the reliability of the Fort-de-France scenario. The results were unanimous. The fleet staff and senior officers generally agreed that, given the relative strength of the battleships on both sides and the lack of absolute intelligence superiority, the likelihood of a decisive victory through a fixed-point artillery engagement within a stable battle period was virtually zero. For leading naval powers like Britain and France, this stable battle period was 6 hours. Human resources are finite, and prolonged, intense, and meticulous micromaneuvering severely strains sailors' energy. While endurance and concentration can be improved through training, there are always limits. Once 6 hours are exceeded, the impact of objective factors such as wind direction, sails, center of gravity, and ocean currents on a ship's posture becomes increasingly pronounced. Deformed ship postures can lead to the collapse of the battle line, significantly impacting the accuracy and power of their artillery fire. To maintain their offensive momentum, commanders resorted to breaking up the battle line and resorting to close-range, mobile warfare and boarding engagements. This was the moment when a single ship was at its weakest against a fleet. The pressure was so great that a Tier 3 ship could be completely overwhelmed in a battle against multiple Tier 5s. Furthermore, the Halloween fleet also contained the Andes, armed with 24-pounder guns. The commanders of the combined fleet suddenly realized that Halloween, having absorbed the defense fleet, was no longer just a source of French hatred, it had become a real threat. Its destruction became a pressing matter for the entire combined fleet, requiring no further delay. "We must avenge the deaths of Lee Francois before the decisive battle," someone at the deduction table raised a new issue. His reasoning was sound. The combined fleet far surpassed Parker's fleet in both morale and combat power. If Peter Parker were defeated and surrendered, the Halloween fleet, without its commander, would inevitably flee, perhaps even to England. By then, it would be too late to avenge Lee Francois's death. Once the British reorganized their fleet, Lee Francois's tragedy would become a mystery, with no hope of redress. A deep sense of mission instantly filled the hearts of the gentlemen present. They represented justice, and their actions would be blessed by God. Thus began a conspiracy against Grenada. On June 8, Fort-de-France announced that the Franco-Dutch fleet, acting as representatives of the French New World colonial government, would visit Lee Francois to pay armed tribute to the deceased. Operation codenamed The Noble Blood of France Must Not Be Shed in Vain. On June 9, in response to the colonial government's declaration, the army took action ahead of the navy. 2 regiments of the Martinique garrison and the newly formed militia, departing the heavily fortified perimeter around Fort-de-France, marched toward the Mount Pelée region in the north of the island, singing songs of revenge. Before that, the large, dark figure, Sander, who had been at the dock on the night of the tragedy, vanished without warning. Chalaman personally searched through the mangled remains, finding no one alive or dead. The slave army suddenly shifted from a 2-man army to a single one. Chalaman was weak, far lacking the decisiveness of his companions and unable to shoulder the burden of an entire slave army. He retreated, quietly abandoning his dream of founding a nation before even leaving Lee Francois. He led his demoralized followers in a flight north, their destination being the easily defended and difficult-to-attack Montpellier. By evening, the combined fleet officially set out, signaling a forfeit of a decisive battle with France. They crossed the Strait of St. Lucia, followed the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean northward to Martinique, and advanced by sea towards the rebel-held mountainous region. Unnoticed, in the dead of night, the Revenge fleet, assembled in response to the tragedy, quietly separated from the main fleet, led by its flagship, the Fury. They sailed southward from the mouth of the St. Lucia Channel, piercing deep into the Atlantic Ocean, dodging the merchant ships along the way. After 4 days of sailing, they arrived unnoticed in the Grenadines, just a day's distance from Grenada's capital, the legendary home of the Halloween fleet. On June 11, the land forces engaged the slave army. In the outskirts of Saint-Pierre, the slaves, inferior in equipment, training, and morale, were steadily defeated. The defeated, dead or alive, would soon become decorations on crosses in French hands. Thousands of crudely crafted crosses were laid from Saint-Pierre to the mountainous interior, stretching from the beach to the smoky volcanoes, forming a new thoroughfare that the French called the Route des Loyalists. On June 12, the Revenge fleet attacked the port of St. George, Grenada, at dawn. The desolate commercial port, rumored to be teeming with the sinister ships of the Halloween fleet, was now home to only a few small fishing boats ready to sail. The island's settlers, watching in horror as the newly minted, third-class battleship HMS Furious loomed like a mountain of pressure, rang its bells before the French could fire, decisively surrendering. Following the British devastation along Martinique's Atlantic coast during the Battle of the Windward Islands, France ostentatiously seized Grenada. This marked the beginning of France's death knell. On June 13, the combined fleet, leisurely sailing along the coast of Martinique, ran unprepared into the battlefield created by Sir Parker. The tranquil, coastal route from Baspin to Grand Rivière belonged to France, to Martinique, an overseas department of the Kingdom of France. The combined fleet, enjoying a life free from fear, savored fine wines and moderately good shipboard meals while reveling in the end of those damned slaves, and, even more damned than the slaves, the Halloween fleet. They thought they had pulled off a brilliant deception, demonstrating France's strength to the world while delaying the decisive battle with the British. They had used a classic strategic deception to eliminate the Halloween fleet, a potential game-changer. Little did they know that all of this was just part of the plan of Peter Parker, the Sea Fox. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.